The email sat in Daniel's sent folder like evidence of something he couldn't quite name. Not friendship, not truce, just a subtle shift in the gravitational field between two people who'd existed in opposition for so long that détente felt almost dangerous. He didn't expect it to change anything. Madeline Cross was still the CEO who'd made his mornings predictable only in their cruelty, and he was still the single father barely holding his life together with duct tape and determination. One civil email didn't erase months of calculated humiliation. But Wednesday morning, when Daniel arrived at his desk with Lily's latest artwork, a drawing of what appeared to be either a cat or possibly a dragon, the distinction remained unclear. He found a note on his keyboard. Plain white paper, folded once, his name written across the front in handwriting that was somehow both elegant and aggressive. Each letter formed with the kind of precision that suggested its author approached even penmanship as a competitive sport. Inside, a single line: "The dragon is better than the cat." MC Daniel looked at the drawing again, realized Madeline Cross had somehow identified the ambiguous creature as both a dragon and a cat, had walked past his desk early enough that no one witnessed the delivery, and had left something that might constitute humor, or possibly criticism of his artistic interpretation skills. With Madeline, the distinction remained perpetually unclear. He tucked the note into his desk drawer with the others he kept. Lily's cards, Sarah's last birthday message to him, the hospital bracelet from the day his daughter was born. Evidence of moments that mattered, tucked away like talismans against the harder days. The morning proceeded without incident. Madeline made her usual rounds through the department, but when she reached Daniel's corner, she simply nodded. A gesture so brief anyone watching might have missed it, and continued past without commentary on his workspace decor, his clothing, or his existence in general. The absence of cruelty felt louder than any insult she'd previously delivered, and Daniel wasn't the only one who noticed. "Did that just happen?" James Chen appeared at Daniel's elbow the moment Madeline disappeared into the elevator. "Did Madeline Cross just not eviscerate you?" "Apparently." "Is she sick? Having a stroke? Replaced by a slightly more human clone?" Daniel kept his eyes on his monitor. "Maybe she's just having a better day. Madeline Cross doesn't have better days. She has terrifying days and apocalyptic days. Those are the only two settings." James lowered his voice conspiratorially. He took his lunch with Lily in the daycare center, listened to her enthusiastic explanation of why purple was scientifically the best color, and tried not to think about the payment still due Friday or the careful calculations he'd been running every night, moving money between mental categories like a chess player trying to avoid checkmate. Thursday brought the kind of autumn rain that made everything gray and heavy, the city wrapped in clouds so low they seemed to press down on the buildings like a physical weight. Daniel arrived early again, coffee in hand, umbrella dripping in the stand by the elevator. The systems engineering department was still mostly empty, just a few other early arrivals hunched over keyboards. The morning silence broken only by the ambient hum of electronics and climate control. He was deep in code review when movement caught his peripheral vision. Madeline Cross stood beside his desk, not passing through on her morning inspection, but actually standing there, waiting for him to notice her presence. She wore another perfectly tailored suit, this one charcoal gray, and her expression held something Daniel couldn't quite identify. Not anger, not even impatience. Something softer, more uncertain. "Mr. Reed?" Her voice was quiet enough that it wouldn't carry to the other early arrivals. "Do you have a moment?" Every instinct Daniel possessed screamed warnings. Nothing good came from private conversations with Madeline Cross. But he minimized his code window and turned to face her, searching her face for clues about what fresh disaster she'd devised. "Of course, Ms. Cross." "Not here." She glanced toward the conference room at the department's far end, currently dark and empty. "Somewhere we can speak privately." Daniel's stomach dropped, but he stood and followed her across the office, acutely aware of the few other employees watching this procession with barely concealed curiosity. Private conversations with the CEO were rare and usually preceded either spectacular promotions or immediate terminations. Given his history with Madeline Cross, Daniel strongly suspected he wasn't about to receive a promotion. The conference room was cold, The climate controls set to a temperature that assumed the space would be full of bodies generating warmth through existence and nervous energy. Madeline closed the door behind them, but didn't immediately speak, instead moving to the window where rain streaked down the glass in patterns that looked almost intentional, almost beautiful. "I owe you an apology," she said finally, still facing the window, her reflection visible in the rain-darkened glass. "For the past 6 months, for every morning, for using you as my daily target practice." Daniel stood frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. Madeline Cross didn't apologize. Madeline Cross barely acknowledged other people's humanity, let alone her own capacity to harm it. But here she was, her shoulders tense with what might actually be discomfort, offering something that sounded remarkably like contrition. "I don't expect you to accept it," she continued. "I probably wouldn't, in your position, but I needed to say it. What I've done, how I've treated you, it's been inexcusable." "Why?" The question escaped before Daniel could stop it. "Why me specifically? What did I do to become your target?" Madeline turned from the window, and Daniel saw something in her face he'd never seen before. Genuine emotion, unguarded and raw. "You reminded me of someone I used to know, someone I used to be. Before I learned that caring about people gives them power to destroy you." "So you decided to destroy me first?" "I decided to prove to myself that I was stronger than whatever softness your situation triggered." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "Turns out, I was just cruel. There's a difference, apparently." The rain continued its assault on the windows, filling the silence between them. Daniel should have felt vindicated, triumphant even. But instead, he just felt tired, like he'd been carrying Madeline's issues along with his own all these months, and only now realized how heavy the combined weight had become. "Your daughter," Madeline said suddenly. "Lily. The drawing on your desk, the family tree with 3 people. Who's the third person?" Daniel's throat tightened. "You. Apparently she's decided you're my friend, and friends belong in family trees." Something crossed Madeline's face that looked almost like pain. "Children shouldn't—" She stopped, started again. "I had a son once, Gabriel. He would have been 12 now." The revelation hit Daniel like a physical blow. Would have been? Stillborn, full term, perfect in every way except the part where his heart beat. Madeline's voice was clinical, detached, the words delivered like a medical report rather than a tragedy. "My husband left 6 months later. Said he couldn't look at me without seeing what we'd lost. Turns out grief doesn't always bring people together. Sometimes it just reveals how alone you actually were all along." Daniel didn't know what to say. What could anyone say to that? Sorry seemed pathetically inadequate, but silence felt equally wrong. So he said the only true thing he could think of. "I'm sorry. That's unimaginable loss." "Yes. Well." Madeline straightened, pulling her armor back into place with visible effort. "It was a long time ago. I've moved on, obviously. Built quite an empire out of the ashes. Turns out channeling grief into corporate domination is very effective, if emotionally unhealthy. Is that what I reminded you of? Your loss. You reminded me that people still choose love over power, that someone could have a child and treat that as their greatest accomplishment rather than their biggest liability. You walked in here every day proving that I'd made the wrong choice, that protecting yourself from pain by refusing to feel anything was just another kind of death." She met his eyes directly. "I hated you for that, for making me question the life I'd built." The honesty was almost unbearable. Daniel had spent months thinking Madeline Cross was simply a terrible person, had reduced her to villain status in his mind because it made the daily humiliation easier to endure. But she was just someone who'd lost everything and decided never to risk anything again, someone who'd confused invulnerability with strength. "I don't hate you," Daniel said quietly. "I never did. I just wanted you to see me, to acknowledge that my circumstances were real and that I was doing my best." "I saw you," Madeline's voice cracked slightly. "That was the problem. I saw you every single day being exactly the kind of father I'd never get to be a mother to, and it felt like the universe was mocking me, so I mocked you instead. I turned my pain into your problem because I didn't know what else to do with it." The conference room felt smaller suddenly. the space between them charged with something neither had invited, but both were trapped with now. Understanding, maybe. Or at least the beginning of it. Daniel thought about his own journey through grief after Sarah's death, how he'd occasionally lashed out at people who had intact families, people whose wives were still alive, people who took for granted what he'd lost. He'd never weaponized that pain the way Madeline had, but he understood the impulse, recognized the anger that came from watching other people have what you'd been denied.
Your email the other night, Daniel said, about HR processing my flexible hours correctly. What did that mean? It meant I went through your personnel file and discovered you've been getting subtle pushback on your schedule for months. Small denials, delays processing your time off requests, notes in your file about your limited availability. Nothing official enough to be actionable, but enough to create a hostile work environment. Madeline's jaw tightened. I corrected it, made it very clear that your negotiated schedule is policy, not preference, and anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me personally. Daniel stared at her. Why would you do that? Because you were right. What you said in my office Tuesday, about cruelty coming from pain. I've been in pain for so long I forgot it wasn't a permanent condition. And I'm tired, Reed. I'm exhausted from being this person, from maintaining this performance. Your daughter thinks I'm your friend. Maybe I should try being worthy of that instead of proving her wrong. The vulnerability in those words was stunning. Madeline Cross, CEO and corporate legend, admitting exhaustion and loneliness to an employee she'd tormented for months. It should have felt like victory, but it just felt sad. Two people finally being honest about how isolated they both were, how badly they'd both been managing their respective griefs. I don't know if we can be friends, Daniel said carefully. The power dynamic makes that complicated. You're still my boss. You still control whether I can pay my rent and feed my daughter. I know. Madeline moved away from the window, closer to where Daniel stood. But maybe we can be less hostile. Maybe I can stop using you as my emotional punching bag and you can stop flinching every time you see me. That seems like a low bar. I'm starting with achievable goals. Despite everything, Daniel almost smiled. There was something darkly funny about Madeline Cross approaching basic human decency as a project with measurable objectives. Okay, he said, less hostile. I think I can manage that. Good. She paused at the conference room door, her hand on the handle. Your daughter's artwork. I really do think the dragon is better than the cat. Dragons have narrative potential. Cats are just cats. She left before Daniel could respond, the door clicking shut behind her with the soft finality of a chapter ending or possibly beginning. Daniel stood alone in the cold conference room, rain still beating against the windows, trying to process what had just happened. An apology. An explanation. A glimpse behind the armor at the wounded person underneath. It didn't erase the past 6 months, didn't make the daily humiliation hurt less in retrospect. But it was something, a start, a possibility. He returned to his desk to find James Chen practically vibrating with suppressed curiosity. Well? James demanded. Are you fired? Promoted? Transferred to a facility in Siberia? None of the above. Then what was that about? Just a work discussion. Daniel settled back into his chair, pulled up his code review, tried to project normalcy. Nothing dramatic. But James wasn't buying it. Nobody has work discussions in dark conference rooms with Madeline Cross at 7:30 in the morning. That woman schedules her scheduling meetings. She doesn't do spontaneous. First time for everything. James opened his mouth to press further, but something in Daniel's expression must have warned him off. He retreated to his own workspace with obvious reluctance, leaving Daniel to his code and his thoughts and the growing realization that his life had just gotten significantly more complicated in ways he couldn't begin to predict. The morning progressed. More employees arrived, the office filled with its usual noise, and Daniel worked steadily through his task list while trying not to think about Madeline's revelation about her son, about the grief she'd been carrying for over a decade, about the ways loss could warp people into shapes they never intended to become. He'd been lucky in some ways. Sarah's death had made him softer, more present, determined to be everything Lily needed because he couldn't bear the thought of her losing more than she already had. But he could imagine another version of himself, one where grief had hardened him instead, where he'd turned inward and bitter and cruel,
because pain with nowhere to go eventually poisoned everything it touched. At 10:30, Daniel's computer pinged with a calendar notification, meeting with HR at 11. He stared at the alert, anxiety spiking immediately. HR meetings were never good news. HR meetings that appeared in your calendar with no context or warning were especially concerning. He checked the invitation details. Benefits review, D. Reed, with Patricia Winters listed as the organizer. Patricia, who ran the entire HR department and definitely didn't handle routine benefits reviews personally. This was bad. This was Madeline's HR correction blowing up in his face. This was him getting fired for causing trouble, for being the squeaky wheel that got replaced rather than greased. Daniel made it through the next 30 minutes on autopilot, his hands moving across the keyboard while his mind spiraled through worst-case scenarios. How long could he stretch his savings? What other tech companies were hiring? Could he afford the gap in health insurance? Would he have to pull Lily from the daycare she loved, from the stability and routine that had finally made her feel safe again? At 10:55, he headed toward HR on the building's 32nd floor. The HR suite was decorated with motivational posters about teamwork and innovation, the corporate equivalent of telling people to have a nice day while auditing their expense reports. Patricia Winters' office occupied the corner, actual walls instead of glass partitions, a door that closed, the kind of privacy that came with sufficient seniority. Her assistant waved Daniel through immediately. "She's expecting you." Patricia sat behind a desk that was somehow both immaculately organized and clearly well used, every document in its place, but the whole arrangement suggesting someone who actually worked rather than just performed work for appearances. She was somewhere in her 50s, with steel gray hair cut in a practical bob, and reading glasses on a chain that made her look like everyone's competent aunt. "Mr. Reed, please sit." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Thank you for making time on short notice." "Of course." Daniel sat, tried to keep his hands from fidgeting, failed. "Is there a problem with my benefits?" "Quite the opposite." Patricia pulled up something on her computer. "I've been reviewing your file per Ms. Cross's request, and I found several irregularities that need immediate correction." Here it comes. Daniel braced himself. "Your flexible schedule was approved when you started 3 years ago," Patricia continued, "but it appears there's been ongoing pushback that was never properly addressed. Time off requests delayed, notes in your file questioning your commitment, subtle pressure to conform to standard hours despite your documented accommodation." "I didn't realize." "You weren't supposed to realize. That's how these things work." Patricia's expression was sympathetic but firm. Plausible deniability. Nothing official, nothing you could point to and say, this is discrimination. Just a pattern of small obstacles that add up to a hostile environment. "So I'm not in trouble?" "You're not in trouble. The people who created that hostile environment are in trouble. I've already had conversations with 3 managers and issued formal warnings." She clicked through more documents. "Additionally, I'm increasing your bereavement leave retroactively. You should have received more time when your wife passed, and I'm correcting that oversight now. You'll see the adjustment in your next paycheck." Daniel couldn't process what he was hearing. "Ms. Winters, I don't understand. Why is this happening now?" Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying him over her reading glasses. "Because Ms. Cross takes compliance seriously. When she identifies a problem, she expects it fixed immediately, and apparently your situation qualified as a problem that needed fixing. But she's the one who—" Daniel stopped himself, uncertain how much Patricia knew about Madeline's months of cruelty. "Who made your life difficult?" Patricia finished for him. "Yes, I'm aware. Miss Cross and I had a very frank conversation yesterday about management behavior and hostile work environments. She's addressing her approach." The careful phrasing told Daniel exactly how uncomfortable that conversation must have been. He couldn't imagine Madeline sitting in this office being lectured about her behavior by HR, couldn't picture her accepting criticism without her usual armor of authority and defensiveness. But apparently it had happened. Apparently she'd subjected herself to correction because she meant what she'd said in the conference room about being tired of the person she'd become. "There's one more thing." Patricia handed him a folder. "We're restructuring the daycare center's payment policies. Effective immediately, payment is due on a monthly basis instead of weekly, and we're implementing a sliding scale based on salary. Your rate is being reduced by 40%. Daniel's hands shook slightly as he took the folder. 40%. That was the difference between constantly juggling bills and actually being able to breathe. That was being able to afford Lily's asthma medication without choosing which other expense to sacrifice. That was the possibility of saving money instead of living perpetually on the edge of disaster. Ms. Winters, I don't know what to say. Don't thank me. Thank Ms. Cross. This was her initiative. Patricia's expression softened. Between you and me, Mr. Reed, I've worked with Madeline Cross for 8 years. She's brilliant and demanding and occasionally terrifying. But I've never seen her personally intervene in an employee's circumstances like this. Whatever conversation you two had, it made an impression. Daniel left HR in a daze, the folder clutched against his chest like a shield, or possibly proof that the last hour had actually happened. He made it back to his desk, sank into his chair, and stared at his monitor without seeing anything on the screen. Madeline Cross had just made his life measurably better. The woman who'd spent 6 months making every morning a fresh exercise in humiliation had apparently spent the last 2 days systematically correcting every professional obstacle he faced. Why? His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Don't read too much into it. I'm just correcting my own mistakes. MC Daniel stared at the message. She'd gotten his personal cell number from his file, was apparently reading his mind from wherever she was in the building, and was already trying to manage the narrative about her actions. But underneath the dismissive tone, he heard something else. Discomfort with being seen as kind, anxiety about changing the established dynamic between them, uncertainty about what came next now that she'd stopped performing cruelty and didn't quite know what else to perform instead. He typed back, "Thank you anyway." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "You're welcome." 2 words that probably took Madeline Cross more courage to type than most people spent on entire conversations. Daniel set his phone down, opened the HR folder, and tried to focus on documentation that outlined his new benefits instead of on the growing complexity of his relationship with the woman who'd been his tormentor and was now apparently, what? Ally? Friend? Person who'd recognized her own cruelty and was attempting repair? Lunch with Lily that day felt different. Daniel couldn't quite shake the morning's revelations, kept thinking about Madeline's stillborn son, about the husband who'd left, about the decade of loneliness and grief channeled into corporate success and emotional isolation. Lily chattered about a puppet show Mrs. Patterson had organized, completely oblivious to the seismic shifts happening in her father's professional life. And Daniel was grateful for that obliviousness, for her ability to exist in a world where adults' complications didn't yet touch her. "Daddy, you're not listening," Lily announced, hands on her hips in a gesture she'd learned from some cartoon character who'd achieved breakout popularity among 6-year-olds that season. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Tell me again about the puppet." He was a bear who wanted to be a dancer, but everyone said bears can't dance because they're too big and clumsy. But then he practiced, and at the end he was the best dancer, and everyone was sorry they were mean to him. Daniel heard the story's subtext clearly. Lily processing the world's cruelties through narratives where perseverance and goodness eventually triumphed, where people who were mean eventually learned better. It was the same impulse that had made her draw Madeline into their family tree, the same hope that made her believe adults could remember how to be kind if you just gave them enough chances. "That's a good story," Daniel said. "I like that the bear didn't give up." Mrs. Patterson said sometimes people are mean because they're scared, not because they're bad. They just forgot how to be brave. Daniel wondered if Mrs. Patterson was a secret philosopher, or if all children's educators eventually accumulated wisdom through repeated exposure to simple truths. Mrs. Patterson sounds very smart. "She is. She said I could be a puppet master when I grow up if I want." "You can be anything you want, Lily." She considered this seriously, then returned to her sandwich, apparently satisfied that her career options remained adequately open. Daniel watched her eat, this small person who trusted him completely, who believed in happy endings and redemption arcs and the fundamental goodness of people despite all the evidence suggesting otherwise. He wanted desperately to protect that faith, to make sure the world didn't crush her optimism the way it crushed so many people's, to ensure she grew up believing kindness was strength rather than weakness.
That afternoon brought a crisis in the server infrastructure, the kind of cascading technical failure that required all hands on deck and turned the systems engineering department into organized chaos. Daniel dove into the problem alongside 24 other engineers, everyone working frantically to identify the source of the corruption before it spread through critical systems. Hours blurred together in a haze of command lines and diagnostic tools and increasingly desperate patches. By 4:30, they'd isolated the issue to a failed backup protocol that had created a recursive loop in the data validation system. By 5 o'clock, they had a solution deployed. By 5:15, Daniel was covered in stress sweat and caffeine jitters and the particular exhaustion that came from averting disaster through teamwork and technical expertise. He was packing up to leave, 5:30 exactly, because some boundaries mattered even during emergencies, when Madeline appeared in the department doorway. She'd discarded her suit jacket at some point, her sleeves rolled up in a gesture that made her look almost human, almost approachable. She surveyed the room with those pale gray eyes that missed nothing, taking in the exhausted engineers and the emergency's aftermath. "Good work today," she announced to the room at large. That could have been catastrophic. Instead, it was merely expensive. "I appreciate everyone's quick response." The department accepted this praise with the wary gratitude of people unused to positive feedback from their CEO. Madeline's gaze found Daniel across the room, held for a moment that felt weighted with something unspoken, then moved on. Those who stayed past their scheduled hours will see overtime compensation on their next check, and I'm buying dinner for anyone who needs to stay late finishing the documentation. Have the restaurant bills sent to my assistant. She paused at the doorway. "Reed, a word before you leave?" Every person in the department suddenly became very interested in their keyboards. Daniel felt their curiosity like physical pressure as he followed Madeline into the corridor away from the office's glass walls and observant eyes. "You left at 5:30, Madeline said without preamble. "That's my scheduled time." In the middle of a crisis. The crisis was resolved by 5. The rest is documentation and cleanup that doesn't require my specific expertise. Daniel kept his voice level. "You told HR my flexible schedule was policy. I'm following that policy." Something that might have been approval flickered across Madeline's face. "Good. I'm glad you're holding the boundary. I was testing whether you'd actually enforce it or if you'd revert to sacrificing your needs when pressed." "That was a test?" "Everything's a test, Reed. The question is whether you're learning the right lessons." She glanced toward the elevator, then back to him. "Your daughter, Lily. I'd like to meet her properly. Not just pass her in the hallway, but actually talk to her if you'd be comfortable with that." Daniel's protective instincts flared immediately. "Why?" "Because she drew me into your family tree. Because she thinks I'm your friend. Because I'd like to understand why a 6-year-old has more faith in people than most adults manage." Madeline's expression was vulnerable in a way that looked physically painful for her. "And because I'd like to see what I might have had, if my son had lived. Just for a moment. Just to remember what it feels like to be someone's whole world." The honesty was devastating. Daniel thought about saying no, about protecting Lily from whatever complications might arise from proximity to Madeline Cross. But he remembered the drawing, remembered Lily's insistence that Madeline just needed to remember how to be kind, remembered his own journey through grief and the way small kindnesses from strangers had sometimes been the only thing standing between him and complete collapse. "Tomorrow," he said. "Lunch in the daycare center, 30 minutes. If Lily seems uncomfortable at any point, you leave immediately." "Agreed." "And Ms. Cross, she's 6. Whatever you're looking for in this interaction, closure, understanding, absolution, she can't provide that. She's just a kid who likes purple and makes up songs and believes in happy endings. Don't make her responsible for your healing." Madeline's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "I understand." Daniel left her standing in the corridor and headed for the elevator, his heart pounding with anxiety about what he'd just agreed to. Introducing Lily to Madeline felt like inviting a hurricane into their carefully structured calm, like risking his daughter's emotional safety for the sake of someone else's redemption arc. But maybe Lily's faith wasn't misplaced. Maybe people could remember how to be kind. Maybe Madeline Cross could look at his daughter and see possibility instead of loss, future instead of past. Or maybe this would be a disaster that Daniel would spend years trying to help Lily process. Too late now. The decision was made. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel sat at his kitchen table staring at the HR documentation that outlined his improved benefits. 40% reduction in daycare costs, retroactive bereavement leave, protected flexible schedule. It was more than a correction of past wrongs. It was Madeline using her power to materially improve his life in ways that would ripple forward for months or years. It was her version of apology, rendered in practical terms because emotions were harder than policy adjustments. His phone buzzed with another text from that now familiar unknown number. "Are you sure about tomorrow?" Madeline, apparently experiencing her own anxiety about their agreement. Daniel typed back, "No, but Lily is." And sometimes 6-year-olds understand things adults have forgotten. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, "I hope you're right." "Me too." Daniel set his phone aside and went to check on Lily one more time before bed. She was sprawled across her mattress in the boneless way children slept, bun trapped under one arm, her face peaceful in the nightlight's glow. He adjusted her blanket, kissed her forehead gently enough not to wake her, and stood in the doorway watching her breathe. Tomorrow, he would introduce his daughter to a woman who'd spent 6 months making his life miserable, who'd carried grief so long it had calcified into cruelty, who was trying desperately to remember how to be human. Tomorrow, everything might get more complicated or possibly simpler. Tomorrow, Lily might work her particular magic, the kind of magic that came from believing in people's capacity for change, from having faith that kindness could reach anyone if delivered with enough sincerity. Tomorrow. But tonight, Daniel just watched his daughter sleep and hoped he wasn't making a terrible mistake born from his own capacity for empathy, from his inability to ignore someone else's pain even when they'd caused him so much of his own. Friday morning dawned cold and clear, the autumn sun cutting through the city with sharp-edged brightness that made everything look defined and consequential. Daniel dressed carefully, helped Lily choose her favorite dress, the purple one with yellow flowers, naturally, and tried not to project his anxiety onto their usual morning routine. She chattered through breakfast, oblivious to the significance of the day ahead, and Daniel was grateful for that obliviousness, even as he dreaded what might disturb it. They arrived at the office 15 minutes early. Daniel settled Lily in the daycare center with Mrs. Patterson, who noticed his tension immediately. "Everything okay, Mr. Reed?" "Fine. Just, someone's joining us for lunch today. Someone from upstairs." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose fractionally, but she didn't press. "Well, Lily's excited about showing off her puppet skills. I'm sure whoever it is will be appropriately impressed." Daniel worked through the morning in a fog of nervous energy, unable to focus properly on code that required concentration he couldn't maintain. Around him, the office buzzed with its Friday energy. People already mentally checked out for the weekend. Conversations drifting toward plans and relaxation, and all the things people with normal lives did when they weren't working. Daniel had almost forgotten what that felt like, what it meant to have mental space for leisure instead of just constant low-grade crisis management. At 11:45, his phone buzzed. "I'm outside the daycare center. Do I just go in?" Even through text, Daniel could hear Madeline's uncertainty. This woman who commanded boardrooms and dominated business negotiations was nervous about meeting a 6-year-old. He typed back, "I'll be right down." The elevator ride felt eternal. Daniel's hands were actually shaking slightly as he exited on the ground floor and headed toward the daycare center, where Madeline stood outside the cheerful entrance looking profoundly out of place. She'd dressed down as much as someone like her probably could, slacks and a simple blouse instead of her usual armor-like suits, but she still radiated authority and discomfort in equal measure. "Ready?" Daniel asked. "No, but I'm here anyway." They entered together. Mrs. Patterson looked up from where she was organizing the lunch tables, her professional smile faltering slightly when she recognized Madeline Cross. The CEO's reputation clearly preceded her even to the daycare staff, but Mrs. Patterson recovered quickly, gesturing toward where Lily sat with several other children, all of them engaged in what appeared to be an intense negotiation about whose turn it was to be the puppet master. "Lily," Daniel called gently, "someone's here to meet you." Lily looked up, saw her father, and then saw Madeline standing behind him. Her face lit up with recognition and something that looked remarkably like vindication. the expression of a child whose instincts about people had just been proven correct. You came! Lily abandoned the puppet negotiation and crossed the room with that peculiar half-run children used indoors when actual running was forbidden. She stopped in front of Madeline, tilting her head back to look up at someone who seemed impossibly tall from a 6-year-old's perspective. I'm Lily. Daddy says you work together. Madeline looked like she'd forgotten how to breathe. She stared down at Lily with an expression that cycled through so many emotions Daniel couldn't track them all. Pain, longing, fear, something that might have been hope or possibly terror. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough with suppressed feeling. Hello, Lily. I'm Madeline. Your father has told me about you. Good things? Very good things. Lily considered this, apparently satisfied. Do you want to see my puppet? I've been practicing. Mrs. Patterson says I have natural talent. I would like that very much. Daniel watched as his daughter led Madeline toward the puppet theater set up in the corner, watched as this woman who'd been his antagonist for months carefully lowered herself to Lily's level, watched as she listened with focused attention while Lily explained the complex hierarchy of puppet characters and their various narrative roles. Madeline's face was unguarded in a way Daniel had never witnessed, all her usual defenses abandoned as she engaged with this small person who had no idea she was talking to a billionaire CEO. Mrs. Patterson appeared at Daniel's elbow. That's Madeline Cross, she whispered, somewhere between awe and concern. Yes. And she's having lunch with Lily because my daughter thinks everyone deserves a second chance, and I'm trying to believe she's right. They moved to the lunch tables, Lily claiming the seat between Daniel and Madeline with the territorial certainty of someone who'd orchestrated this entire encounter in her 6-year-old mind. Daniel unpacked their sandwiches while Madeline sat rigid and uncertain, clearly unsure of the protocol for children's lunch etiquette. You need to open your sandwich, Lily informed her seriously. That's the rule. You have to see what you're eating. I didn't bring... You can share mine, Lily announced, splitting her peanut butter and jelly sandwich with the generosity of someone who'd never experienced food scarcity. Daddy always makes extra anyway. Madeline accepted half a sandwich from a 6-year-old like she was receiving communion, held it carefully as if it might shatter. Thank you, Lily. You're welcome. Do you have kids? The question was innocent, devastating. Daniel moved to intervene, but Madeline spoke first, her voice quiet but steady. I almost did, a long time ago. But he died before he was born. Lily absorbed this information with the solemn gravity children brought to topics they didn't fully understand but recognized as important. That's sad. Yes, was very sad. My mommy died too, when I was 3. I don't remember her very much, but Daddy tells me stories, so I kind of remember from the stories. Madeline's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Your father must be a very good storyteller. He is. He can do different voices and everything. Lily took a bite of sandwich, then added with perfect child logic. Maybe you could be in our family now, since you don't have one and we have an extra spot. The words hung in the air. Daniel stopped breathing. Madeline's face crumpled for just a moment before she controlled it, before she rebuilt her composure enough to respond. That's very kind of you, Lily, but families are complicated. Not really, Lily said with the confidence of someone who'd never navigated adult complications. You just need people who care about you and you care about them. That's what Daddy says. The rest is just details. Madeline looked at Daniel over Lily's head, her expression asking 1,000 questions neither of them knew how to answer. But Daniel saw what his daughter saw. Underneath all the armor and cruelty and carefully maintained distance, Madeline was just someone who'd lost everything and was desperately, painfully alone. She'd built an empire but forgotten to build a life. She'd protected herself so thoroughly, she'd trapped herself instead. Lily's right, Daniel said quietly. Families are simpler than we make them. They're about showing up, about being there when it matters, about choosing each other even when it's difficult. I don't know how to do that, Madeline admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Neither did I, before Lily, but she taught me, and I think... Daniel hesitated, then committed to the leap. I think we could teach you, too, if you wanted to learn. Madeline closed her eyes, a single tear escaping down her perfect makeup despite her best efforts. Lily, with the preternatural instinct children had for emotional distress,
reached out and took Madeline's hand. "It's okay to be sad," Lily said seriously. "Daddy says sometimes sad feelings need to come out or they get stuck inside and make everything hurt. You can cry if you need to. We won't tell anyone." That simple permission, delivered with such earnest compassion, shattered something in Madeline that had been cracking all week. She pressed her free hand over her mouth, shoulders shaking with silent sobs she'd probably been holding back for over a decade. Lily held onto her hand with fierce determination, the small child offering comfort to a woman who'd never allowed herself to receive it. Daniel moved closer, providing physical presence without demanding anything, letting Madeline break down in the corner of a daycare center on a Friday afternoon, while his daughter held her hand and whispered that it would be okay. Everything would be okay. Sometimes people just needed to cry. And that was fine. That was normal. That was what you did when you remembered you were human instead of just strong. Around them, the daycare continued its normal rhythms. Children played and laughed. Mrs. Patterson quietly redirected curious kids away from their corner. The world kept spinning while Madeline Cross finally allowed herself to grieve for the son she'd lost, for the husband who'd left, for the decades she'd spent building walls instead of bridges. When she finally regained control, Madeline's makeup was ruined and her eyes were red, and she looked more real than Daniel had ever seen her look. "I'm sorry," she said hoarsely. "That was unprofessional." "We're not at work," Lily said matter-of-factly. "This is daycare, different rules. Plus, nobody cares if you cry. People cry all the time. It's not a big deal." Madeline laughed, wet and genuine. "You're very wise, Lily." "I know. Daddy tells me that a lot." They finished lunch with lighter conversation, Lily describing her current favorite cartoon in exhaustive detail, Madeline asking questions with genuine interest, Daniel watching this impossible scene unfold with something that felt dangerously close to hope. When it was time for Madeline to return upstairs, Lily hugged her without hesitation, wrapping small arms around an adult who clearly hadn't been hugged in years. "You should come back," Lily said. "For lunch again. Next week, maybe." "I'd like that," Madeline replied, and Daniel heard the truth in it. Not polite deflection, but actual desire. He walked Madeline back to the elevators, leaving Lily with Mrs. Patterson and the afternoon's activities. They stood in the lobby, neither quite sure how to acknowledge what had just happened, how to name the shift that had occurred. "Thank you," Madeline said finally, "for trusting me with her, for not assuming I'd contaminate her with my dysfunction. You're not as dysfunctional as you think. You're just hurt. There's a difference. She's remarkable. Your daughter. She has no concept of how cruel the world can be. I hope to keep it that way as long as possible." Madeline nodded, understanding that protective impulse bone deep. "I meant what I said to her about wanting to learn. I don't know if I can be part of a family again, don't know if I remember how, but I'd like to try, if you'll let me." Daniel thought about all the reasons to say no, the power imbalance, the history, the risk to Lily if Madeline reverted to cruelty or simply lost interest once the novelty wore off. But he also thought about Lily's drawing of three figures holding hands, about Mrs. Patterson's puppet show, where the bear learned to dance despite everyone saying it was impossible, about his own belief that people could change if someone gave them a reason to try. "Lunch next Friday," he said. "Same time. And maybe..." He paused, committed to the vulnerability. "Maybe we could get coffee sometime. Just us. Talk without an audience. Figure out what this is." "This?" "Whatever's happening between us. Whatever changed when you stopped being cruel and started being human." Madeline's expression cycled through emotions too complex to name. "Coffee," she repeated, "like normal people." "Exactly like normal people." "I don't know how to be normal, Reed." "Good thing I'm an excellent teacher." She smiled, small, tentative, but genuine. "Friday then, both lunch and coffee. I'll try not to revert to CEO mode. And I'll try not to flinch every time you walk into a room." They parted there in the lobby, returning to their separate floors and separate roles, both carrying the weight of what had shifted between them. Not resolved, not simple, but different than it had been. Daniel went back to his desk and tried to focus on work, but his mind kept returning to Madeline's face when Lily had offered her a place in their family, to the way she'd held his daughter's hand like it was the most precious thing she'd ever touched.
Around him, the office prepared for the weekend. People packed up early, their conversations bright with plans and possibility. And Daniel, for the first time in months, felt like maybe his life was expanding instead of contracting. Maybe the careful boundaries he'd built to protect himself and Lily could become doors instead of walls. Maybe broken people could help each other heal. Maybe loneliness wasn't permanent. Maybe, just maybe, three figures holding hands under a smiling sun wasn't fantasy at all. Maybe it was just difficult. And maybe difficult was okay if you found the right people to be difficult with, people brave enough to remember how to be kind, how to be honest, how to choose connection over safety, even when every instinct screamed that vulnerability meant annihilation. Friday afternoon dissolved into evening. Daniel picked up Lily, drove home through autumn sunset that painted the city gold and amber, and listened to his daughter talk about her day with Madeline, about how she'd known all along that sometimes people just needed reminding about how to be good, how to be present, how to show up for each other, even when it felt impossible. "I like her," Lily announced as they pulled into their apartment complex. "She's sad, but she's trying not to be. That's brave." "Yes," Daniel agreed. "That's very brave." That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel's phone buzzed one more time. "Thank you. For today. For your daughter. For not giving up on me even when I gave you every reason to." Emps Daniel stared at the message, then typed back, "People deserve second chances. Even CEOs. Even single fathers who are too stubborn to accept less than basic human decency. Especially those. Coffee. Monday morning, before work. Coffee. Monday morning." Daniel set his phone aside, checked on Lily one last time, and went to bed in the apartment that felt slightly less empty than it had just days before. Outside, the city continued its endless motion. Inside, two broken people and one hopeful child were learning how to build something new from the wreckage of what they'd lost. Not a replacement family, not a solution to grief, just a possibility. Just a start. Monday morning arrived with the kind of nervous energy that made Daniel check his reflection 3 times before leaving the apartment, made him second-guess his shirt choice, made him feel like a teenager preparing for a first date rather than a 34-year-old widower meeting his boss for coffee. Lily noticed his distraction over breakfast, her spoon suspended halfway to her mouth as she studied him with the unnerving perception children deployed when adults thought they weren't paying attention. "You look fancy," she announced. "Are you going somewhere special?" "Just work, sweetheart." "You never wear that shirt to just work. That's your nice shirt, the one you save for important things." Daniel looked down at the button-down he'd selected. Not worn, not fraying at the cuffs like most of his wardrobe, still holding its original color through careful washing and infrequent use. She was right. This was his armor for occasions that required presenting better than his daily reality suggested he could afford. "I'm having coffee with someone before work," he admitted. "Someone I want to make a good impression on." Lily's face lit up with understanding that seemed far beyond her 6 years. "Madeline, you're having coffee with Madeline. How did you—" "Because you got that look. The one you get when you're nervous, excited. Like when we went to the aquarium and you weren't sure if I'd like the sharks, but you really wanted me to like them because you liked them." She took a triumphant bite of cereal. "I knew you guys would be friends. I told you she just needed reminding." Daniel couldn't help but smile despite his anxiety. "You're too smart for your own good." "I know, Mrs. Patterson says I have emotional intelligence." Lily pronounced the phrase carefully, clearly proud of vocabulary that exceeded typical 6-year-old standards. "That means I understand feelings." "Yes, it does." "So do you like her, or just regular like her?" The question landed like a bomb in the middle of their breakfast routine. Daniel stared at his daughter, searching for appropriate responses that didn't involve explaining the complicated territory between professional relationship, tentative friendship, and whatever else was developing between him and Madeline Cross. They were building something, certainly, but its shape remained unclear, too early for definitions, too charged with history to be simple. "I'm still figuring that out," Daniel said finally, opting for honesty over deflection, "but I like her enough to have coffee with her, to give her a chance to be different than she was before." Lily nodded sagely, as if this confirmed theories she'd been developing. "Good, because I think she needs people. She seems really alone, like nobody ever taught her how to have friends."
The assessment was devastatingly accurate. Daniel kissed the top of Lily's head, marveling at her capacity to see clearly through complications that adults obscured with fear and self-protection. "You're absolutely right. Now finish your breakfast or we'll both be late." They completed their morning routine with practiced efficiency. Teeth brushed, backpack checked, bun retrieved from wherever Lily had abandoned him the night before. The drive to cross industries felt different somehow. The familiar route charged with anticipation Daniel couldn't quite contain. He was meeting Madeline Cross for coffee, voluntarily, as something approaching equals rather than CEO and subordinate employee. The coffee shop Madeline had suggested occupied a corner 2 blocks from the office, the kind of place that catered to professionals who needed caffeine before facing their corporate existences. Daniel arrived 5 minutes early, ordered his usual, black coffee, nothing fancy, because fancy coffee felt like an extravagance he couldn't justify, and claimed a table near the window where he could watch the morning foot traffic while his stomach performed acrobatics. Madeline arrived exactly on time, because of course she did. She'd dressed down again, or what passed for dressed down in her world. Tailored pants, a simple sweater, minimal jewelry. But she still carried herself with that particular authority that came from years of commanding rooms and making decisions that affected thousands of lives. She spotted Daniel immediately, something that might have been relief crossing her face before she schooled it back to neutrality. She ordered something complicated involving multiple modifiers and extra shots, the kind of coffee that required its own instruction manual, then joined Daniel at his window table. They sat across from each other in silence for a moment, neither quite sure how to begin this conversation they'd agreed to have. "Thank you for meeting me," Madeline said finally, wrapping both hands around her cup like she needed the warmth despite the shop's adequate heating. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." "Why wouldn't I?" "Because I've given you every reason to avoid me for the rest of your natural life, and yet here you are, voluntarily spending time with me before work hours require it." Daniel took a sip of his coffee, buying time to formulate his response. "Lily seems to think you're worth the effort. I'm trying to trust her judgment. Your daughter has more faith in humanity than I've managed in 42 years. She hasn't had as many reasons to lose it yet." Madeline's smile was sad, acknowledging the truth they both carried, that experience taught caution, that loss taught fear, that the world gradually wore down the kind of optimism Lily still possessed in abundance. "Tell me about your wife," Madeline said suddenly. "Sarah? How did you meet?" The question surprised Daniel. Most people avoided discussing Sarah, uncomfortable with grief they couldn't fix or loss they couldn't make better. But Madeline leaned forward slightly, genuine interest in her expression, and Daniel found himself answering despite the usual protective instinct that kept those memories private. "College. She was studying literature. I was in computer science. We met in a philosophy class neither of us wanted to take, but needed for requirements. She argued with the professor about Kant, demolished his interpretation in front of 50 students, and I fell in love with someone brave enough to challenge authority with nothing but logic and conviction." Sounds formidable. She was. Smart, fierce, completely unimpressed by pretense or posturing. She saw through people's performances to who they actually were underneath. Daniel paused, remembering. "She would have liked you, I think. The real you, not the armor you show the world." Madeline's hands tightened around her cup. "What makes you think there's a difference?" "Because I've seen glimpses of it. Friday with Lily. In the conference room when you apologized. In the elevator when you looked at Lily's drawing and said, children shouldn't draw fantasy families because it makes reality harder. That wasn't the Ice Queen CEO talking. That was someone who's been hurt and lonely for so long she forgot other options existed." "You're very perceptive for a systems engineer." "I'm very perceptive for a father who spent 3 years learning to read unspoken pain because my daughter couldn't always articulate what she felt." Daniel met Madeline's eyes directly. "I see you, Ms. Cross, the person you're trying not to be, and I don't think she's as terrible as you've convinced yourself." Madeline looked away, staring out the window at passing strangers living their Monday morning lives. "After Gabriel died, after my husband left, I made a decision. I decided emotion was a liability. Caring about people gave them power to destroy you, so the solution was simple. Stop caring. Build success instead of relationships. Control everything you possibly can so nothing can surprise you, nothing can hurt you, nothing can reach through the walls you've constructed. How'd that work out? Spectacularly well from a business perspective. Cross Industries tripled in value under my leadership. I'm regularly featured in magazines about successful CEOs. I've built an empire. She turned back to face him. I've also been profoundly, devastatingly alone. So alone that sometimes I forget what it feels like to have someone know your name and actually care whether you're okay. The raw honesty in her voice was almost unbearable. Daniel wanted to reach across the table, take her hand, offer physical comfort to accompany his words. But they weren't there yet. Weren't at the place where touch came naturally, where physical connection didn't carry the weight of their complicated history. You don't have to be alone anymore, Daniel said quietly. That's a choice you're making, not a permanent condition. I don't know how to be anything else. It's been so long, Reed. I don't remember how to let people in, how to be vulnerable without feeling like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff waiting to fall. So start small. Start with coffee before work. Start with lunch with a 6-year-old who thinks you hung the moon. Start with being honest instead of cruel, present instead of distant. He paused, then added, start with letting someone see you're human and discovering they don't immediately weaponize that knowledge against you. Madeline studied him for a long moment, her pale gray eyes searching his face for something, reassurance maybe, or proof that his kindness wasn't just another performance, another angle, another way of gaining advantage in a world where everyone wanted something. Why are you doing this? She asked finally. Why are you extending this much grace to someone who made your life miserable? Because I know what grief does to people. I know how loss can twist you into shapes you never intended to become. I know what it's like to be so tired of being strong that you forget strength and cruelty aren't the same thing. Daniel's voice was gentle but firm. And because my daughter saw something in you worth saving, and I trust her instincts more than I trust my own protective cynicism. She's 6 years old. She's 6 years old and wiser than most adults I know. She sees the world without all the defensive layers we've accumulated. She looks at you and sees someone who's sad and trying not to be, someone who needs people but doesn't know how to ask for them. That's, Madeline's voice cracked slightly, that's painfully accurate. Then let us in. Let us be the people you're too scared to ask for. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to be willing to try. The coffee shop buzzed with Monday morning energy around them. People ordering complicated drinks, checking phones, having conversations about weekend activities and upcoming work demands. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by the kind of grief and isolation that had shaped both Daniel and Madeline into their current forms. But sitting across from each other in this unremarkable cafe, they were building something different. Not normal exactly, but maybe sustainable, maybe even good. I'm terrified, Madeline admitted, so quietly Daniel almost missed it. Of getting close to you and Lily and having it fall apart. Of learning to need people again and then losing them the way I've lost everyone else. Of being vulnerable and discovering that vulnerability really is weakness, like I've always believed. Vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the only way to actually connect with anyone. And yes, connection means risk. It means you might get hurt, but it also means you might experience joy and companionship and the particular comfort of knowing someone gives a damn whether you're okay. Daniel leaned forward. You're already terrified and alone. What do you have to lose by trying something different? Madeline laughed, sharp and genuine. When you put it that way, my risk-benefit analysis looks pretty foolish. I learned a long time ago that the things worth having usually require risk. Sarah taught me that. Lily reminds me every day, and maybe, he hesitated, then committed. Maybe you could teach me something too. How to trust again after betrayal, how to believe people can change, how to extend grace even when someone's done nothing to earn it. I haven't earned your grace, Reed. Not remotely. No, you haven't, but I'm giving it anyway because that's what people do when they're trying to be better than their worst impulses. We offer each other chances to grow, opportunities to become the people we wish we'd been all along. They finished their coffee in more comfortable silence, the conversation having covered territory neither expected to explore on a Monday morning before work. When they finally stood to leave, Madeline looked different somehow. Still composed, still controlled, but with something softer visible around the edges. like she'd taken off one layer of armor and discovered she could still breathe without it. Same time next week? Madeline asked as they walked toward the office building visible a few blocks away. Same time next week. And Friday lunch with Lily? She'd be disappointed if you didn't show up. She's already planning what she wants to tell you about her week. Madeline's expression turned almost panicked. What if I say something wrong? What if I'm terrible with children in ways I haven't yet discovered? What if she decides I'm not worth the effort after all? Daniel stopped walking, turned to face her directly. Lily has decided you're worth the effort. Trust her judgment. Show up, be honest, and don't try to perform perfection. She doesn't need perfect. She just needs present. Present? Madeline repeated, like she was testing the word's weight. I can try present. That's all any of us can do. They parted ways in the office lobby, Madeline heading toward the executive elevators while Daniel continued to the Standard Bank that served the lower 40 floors. Several employees watched this interaction with poorly concealed curiosity. Daniel Reed and Madeline Cross arriving together, having clearly spent time together before work hours, displaying a familiarity that contradicted everything everyone knew about their relationship. The gossip would be spectacular. Daniel could already imagine the theories circulating through the office grapevine, the speculation about secret affairs and workplace favoritism, and whatever other narratives people constructed to explain the inexplicable. But for once, he didn't care. Let them talk. Let them wonder. What was developing between him and Madeline was too new, too fragile, too important to hide just because people might have opinions. The week unfolded with a rhythm that felt almost surreal. Madeline maintained her professional distance during work hours, but Daniel caught her watching him sometimes, not with her usual critical assessment, but with something that looked almost like curiosity, like she was studying a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. They exchanged occasional text messages, nothing profound, just small observations about their days or links to articles they thought the other might find interesting. It was the digital equivalent of friendship, tentative and careful, two people learning how to interact without the established scripts of CEO and employee, tormentor and victim. Wednesday brought an unexpected crisis. Daniel's car, held together by optimism and discount replacement parts, finally surrendered to entropy in the office parking garage. The check engine light that had been his constant companion for 6 months escalated to complete mechanical failure, the engine refusing to turn over despite Daniel's increasingly desperate attempts at ignition. He was still staring at the unresponsive dashboard when someone knocked on his window. Madeline stood outside his car, her expression caught between concern and something that might have been amusement. Daniel rolled down the window manually, because of course the electronic controls had also failed. "Car trouble," he said unnecessarily. "I can see that. Do you need a ride?" "I need a mechanic, and probably a new car, but I'll settle for calling a tow truck and figuring out how to get Lily home from daycare." "I can take you both." Madeline said it like it was obvious, like offering her CEO services as personal chauffeur was a completely reasonable solution to his transportation emergency. "I have a car and driver downstairs. We can pick up Lily, and I'll have you both home in 20 minutes. Daniel's pride immediately rebelled against accepting. He'd been managing his own disasters for 3 years, had learned to solve problems through stubborn determination and creative resource allocation. Accepting help felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging he couldn't handle his own life. But his practical side recognized reality. It was 5:30, the mechanic he trusted didn't answer calls after 6, and Lily couldn't stay at daycare overnight while he sorted his automotive dysfunction. "Okay," he said, the word tasting like surrender. "Thank you." Madeline's driver, a professional man named Martin, who treated everyone with equal courtesy regardless of their position in the corporate hierarchy, waited with the kind of town car that cost more than Daniel's annual salary. The interior smelled like leather and success, every surface polished to reflection. The whole vehicle, a mobile representation of the economic divide between Madeline's world and Daniel's reality. They collected Lily from the daycare center, where she greeted Madeline with the enthusiasm of someone meeting a celebrity and climbed into the town car with the unbridled excitement children brought to novel experiences. "This is so fancy," she announced, running her hands over the leather seats. "Do you ride in this every day?" "Every day?" Madeline confirmed, watching Lily's delight with an expression that mixed warmth and something that looked almost like pain. The expression of someone witnessing childhood joy while remembering their own son would never experience such simple pleasures. That must be nice. Our car makes funny noises and the door doesn't open right, and Daddy says we have to be gentle with it because it's old and tired. Your car sounds very patient. It is. Daddy says everything deserves respect, even old cars that don't work very well anymore. He says things don't have to be perfect to be valuable. Madeline's eyes found Daniel's in the rearview mirror, and he saw her understanding that his philosophy about respecting imperfect things extended beyond vehicles to people, to relationships, to a woman who'd spent years being cruel because she'd forgotten how to be anything else. They drove through early evening traffic toward the apartment complex Daniel called home, Lily narrating observations about everything they passed while Madeline listened with focused attention. When Martin pulled up to the building, a structure that was charitably described as adequate and more honestly described as barely maintained, Madeline studied it with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. "Thank you for the ride," Daniel said, gathering his messenger bag and preparing to extract Lily from her continued examination of the car's various luxury features. "I really appreciate it." "Reed, wait." Madeline turned in her seat to face him directly. "Your car. Let me handle it." "Handle it?" "Have it towed to a reputable mechanic, fixed properly, and returned to you. Consider it a work expense. Reliable transportation is essential for employee productivity." Daniel's pride flared hot and defensive. "I don't need charity, Ms. Cross." "It's not charity, it's—" She paused, recalibrated. "It's me trying to be helpful instead of performatively generous. Your car is broken. I have resources to fix it. Let me do this one thing that actually matters instead of just writing checks to feel like a good person." The raw honesty in her voice diffused Daniel's defensiveness. She wasn't offering help from a position of superiority, but from a position of wanting to be useful, wanting to contribute something meaningful to people she was learning to care about. It was vulnerable in its own way, this admission that she wanted to help but didn't know how to do it without triggering his pride or making him feel diminished. "Okay," Daniel said finally, "but I'm paying you back. Maybe not immediately, maybe in installments over several months, but I'm paying you back." "Deal." Madeline extended her hand to shake on it, and Daniel took it, feeling the warmth of her palm against his, the momentary connection that felt charged with more than just agreement about automotive repair. Lily, oblivious to the emotional subtext, hugged Madeline goodbye through the car window. "See you Friday for lunch. I'm going to tell you about the frog we found at recess." "I look forward to hearing about the frog," Madeline replied, and she sounded like she meant it. Daniel watched the town car pull away, its taillights disappearing into traffic, and felt the strangest sensation of loss, like he'd grown accustomed to Madeline's presence faster than was wise, like her absence created a tangible void that hadn't existed a week ago. Dangerous territory, this growing attachment to someone who'd so recently been his antagonist. But he was too tired to fight it, too worn down by years of isolation to push away connection when it finally appeared. Thursday afternoon brought the call from the mechanic, a laundry list of repairs that would cost nearly $1,500 to complete properly. Daniel listened to the itemized breakdown with mounting horror, doing rapid calculations in his head, trying to figure out which repairs were critical versus merely advisable. But Madeline had already authorized the work, had already provided payment information, had already solved the problem before Daniel could stress about solving it himself. He texted her immediately. "You didn't have to fix everything, just enough to get it running." Her response came within seconds. "I did have to. Your daughter rides in that car. I wasn't sending her back into something unsafe just to preserve your pride." The maternal protectiveness in that message hit Daniel unexpectedly hard. Madeline was thinking about Lily's safety, prioritizing a child she barely knew over financial efficiency or social protocols about acceptable assistance. It was the kind of thing a parent would do, the kind of instinct that came from caring about someone's well-being more than you cared about boundaries or propriety. "Thank you," Daniel typed back. "Really? Thank you." "Friday lunch," Madeline responded. "Don't forget." Like he could forget.
Like the highlight of his week wasn't increasingly becoming those 30 minutes in the daycare center watching Madeline Cross remember how to be human through his daughter's enthusiastic tutorials on childhood joy. Friday arrived with the kind of anticipation that made the morning drag interminably. Daniel worked through routine tasks with half his attention, the other half already downstairs in the daycare center preparing for Madeline's arrival. At 11:45, his phone buzzed. "I'm nervous. What if I say something wrong?" Daniel smiled at the message, at this powerful CEO reduced to anxiety about lunch with a first grader. "You'll be fine. Just be yourself." Myself is terrifying, not to Lily. To her, you're just Madeline, her father's friend, the lady who's learning how to be part of our family. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before Madeline's response came through. "I don't know how to be part of a family anymore. Good thing Lily's an excellent teacher." Daniel met Madeline in the lobby at noon, found her pacing near the daycare center entrance with the nervous energy of someone approaching an exam they hadn't adequately studied for. She dressed casually again, jeans, actually, which Daniel had never witnessed on her before, and a soft sweater that made her look younger, more vulnerable, less like a corporate powerhouse and more like a person trying to remember how to be normal. "Ready?" Daniel asked. "No, but that doesn't seem to matter anymore. I'm doing things I'm not ready for constantly now. It's exhausting." Welcome to the human condition. They entered the daycare center together, and Lily spotted them immediately. She abandoned the block tower she'd been constructing and rushed over, her face bright with the kind of uncomplicated happiness that came from seeing people you loved showing up exactly when they promised they would. "You came!" She launched herself at Madeline with the confidence of someone who'd never been rejected, and Madeline caught her automatically, this woman who'd lost her own child learning to hold someone else's, learning that physical affection didn't have to hurt even when it reminded you of everything you'd lost. "I promised I would," Madeline said, her voice rough with emotion she didn't quite manage to hide. "I know, but sometimes grown-ups promise and then they forget or get busy or something more important comes up." Lily pulled back to look at Madeline seriously. "But you remembered. That means you're reliable. Daddy says reliable is important." "Your daddy is very wise." "I know. He knows lots of things, like how to fix computers and make spaghetti and do hair that's only a little bit crooked." Lily grabbed Madeline's hand and pulled her toward the lunch tables. "Come on, I saved you a spot." They settled into their now familiar configuration. Lily between Daniel and Madeline, commanding the conversation with stories about her week. She described the frog they'd found at recess with such vivid detail that Daniel could practically see the amphibian in question. She explained her current theory about why clouds were white instead of purple, which involved complex reasoning about color and sky and what happens to crayons when you leave them in hot cars. She asked Madeline questions with the fearless curiosity of someone who didn't understand that CEOs were supposed to be intimidating. What was her favorite color? Did she like dogs or cats better? Had she ever been to Disneyland? Madeline answered each question with surprising patience, engaging with Lily's 6-year-old logic like it was equally valid as adult reasoning. And maybe it was, Daniel thought, watching them interact. Maybe children understood things adults had forgotten. That connection required showing up, that relationships were built through accumulated small moments rather than grand gestures, that everyone needed to feel seen and valued regardless of their age or position or how successfully they'd convinced the world they didn't need anyone. "Can I show you something?" Lily asked suddenly, her voice turning shy in a way that suggested whatever she wanted to share mattered deeply. "Of course," Madeline replied. Lily retrieved her backpack and pulled out a piece of construction paper folded in half. A card, Daniel realized, handmade with the meticulous care children brought to gifts meant for people they loved. She handed it to Madeline with both hands, like she was presenting something precious and fragile. Madeline opened the card carefully. Inside, Lily had drawn 3 stick figures, the same configuration as before, the same family tree representation, but this time she'd added details. The tallest figure wore a tie and glasses like Daniel. The smallest figure had pigtails and held a stuffed rabbit. And the middle figure, the one representing Madeline, wore a smile and held hands with both other figures under a sun that beamed approval on the whole scene. Above the drawing, in Lily's careful printing, "Thank you for being our friend. Love, Lily."
Madeline stared at the card like she'd forgotten how to breathe.
Her hands trembled slightly, and Daniel watched her face cycle through emotions too raw to witness comfortably. Grief, longing, gratitude, fear. Something that looked almost like hope breaking through years of carefully maintained pessimism.
Lily, Madeline's voice cracked. I don't... Do you like it? Lily asked anxiously. I worked really hard on making the hands holding hands look right. Mrs. Patterson said I did a good job. It's perfect. Madeline clutched the card like it was the most valuable thing she'd ever held. It's the most perfect thing anyone's ever given me. Really? Better than money? So much better than money. Money can't make you feel loved, but this... She gestured at the drawing. This makes me feel like maybe I matter to someone, like maybe I'm not alone anymore.
Lily processed this with visible concentration, her face serious in the way children's faces got when they were trying to understand adult emotions that didn't quite translate to their experience. You're not alone, she said finally, with the absolute certainty of someone stating an obvious fact. You have us. Me and Daddy. We're your family now. That's what the picture means. Daniel watched Madeline's careful composure finally shatter completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks despite her obvious efforts to contain them, and she pressed one hand over her mouth like she could physically hold back the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Lily, with the fearless compassion she seemed to possess in infinite supply, simply climbed into Madeline's lap and hugged her, offering the uncomplicated comfort of physical presence and acceptance. It's okay to cry, Lily whispered, repeating the wisdom she'd shared before. Sometimes happy crying and sad crying get mixed up together. That's normal. Madeline wrapped her arms around this small person who decided unilaterally, enthusiastically, that a billionaire CEO needed a family and she was prepared to provide one. She held Lily like she'd never held anything so precious, like she'd been waiting years for permission to need someone this much, like she'd finally found the thing she'd been missing without realizing she was incomplete. Daniel felt his own throat tighten watching them. This was what healing looked like. Messy, vulnerable, happening in a daycare center on a Friday afternoon while other children played and staff pretended not to notice the CEO of their company crying into his daughter's hair. This was what grace looked like when you let it operate. When you stopped protecting yourself long enough to let someone else matter. When you chose connection over safety, even though connection meant you could be hurt again. When Madeline finally regained control, she was different somehow. The armor she usually wore had cracked wide enough that Daniel could see the person underneath. Frightened, but trying. Lonely, but learning. Damaged, but not beyond repair. She kept one arm around Lily, who seemed perfectly content to remain in her lap, and with her free hand she reached across the table and took Daniel's hand. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice still rough from crying, for letting me be part of this. For giving me a chance to remember what it feels like to be someone's family. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. You don't have to thank us for caring about you. That's not transactional. That's just what people do when they choose each other. I'm not used to being chosen. I'm used to achieving, to earning, to fighting for every single thing I have. But you two... She looked at Lily, then back at Daniel. You're just giving this to me. Freely. Without expecting anything in return. Love doesn't keep score, Lily announced with the wisdom of someone quoting lessons learned from stories or possibly from watching her father navigate life as a single parent. That's what makes it love instead of just being nice. Madeline laughed, wet and genuine. You're going to grow up to be either a philosopher or a therapist, Lily. Maybe both. Daddy says I can be anything. Your daddy is absolutely right. They finished lunch with lighter conversation, the emotional intensity of the earlier moments settling into something warm and comfortable. When it was time for Madeline to return to the executive floor, she hugged Lily goodbye with obvious reluctance, already missing this small person who'd invaded her carefully controlled life and refused to accept that loneliness was permanent. In the lobby, away from Lily's hearing, Madeline turned to Daniel with an expression that held equal parts fear and determination. I need to tell you something, she said. And I need you to listen without interrupting because if I stop talking, I won't be able to start again. Daniel nodded, waiting. I'm falling in love with you,
Madeline said in a rush, the words tumbling out like she'd been holding them back so long they'd built up pressure. I know that's terrifying and inappropriate and probably the worst possible idea given our history and the power dynamic and everything else that makes this complicated. I know we barely know each other beyond these past few weeks. I know I've given you every reason to never trust me with anything important. But I need you to know that when I'm with you and Lily, I remember what it feels like to be human. I remember why life matters beyond achievement and control. I remember that I'm more than just my empire and my armor and my careful performance of invulnerability. She paused for breath, and Daniel saw the vulnerability in her face, the fear that she'd just destroyed whatever fragile thing they'd been building by being too honest, too soon, too recklessly open with feelings that were supposed to be carefully managed and strategically deployed. I'm not asking you to feel the same way, Madeline continued. I'm not even sure I'm asking you to feel anything specific. I just needed you to know that this matters to me. You matter to me. Lily matters to me. And I'm terrified of what that means. Terrified I'll ruin it somehow. Terrified I'll revert to the person I was before and hurt you all over again. But I'm more terrified of going back to being alone, of rebuilding those walls now that I've remembered what it feels like to let someone in. Daniel stood in the lobby of the building where he worked, where Madeline commanded an empire, where their professional relationship was supposed to be clearly defined and appropriately distant. But everything had changed so fast, had shifted so completely, that professional distance felt like a lie they'd both stopped believing. I don't know what I feel yet, Daniel said, honestly. 3 weeks ago, you were making my life miserable. Now you're fixing my car and having lunch with my daughter and telling me you're falling in love. That's a lot of change to process. I know. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. But, Daniel interrupted gently, I know I want to keep doing this. Keep having coffee before work. Keep watching you and Lily together. Keep learning who you are underneath the armor you've worn for so long. I know I feel something when I'm with you. Something that might be the beginning of love, or might just be hope that I'm not the only person trying to build a life from grief. I know Lily's right about you, that you just needed reminding how to be kind, how to be present, how to let people matter, and I know... He paused, then committed fully. I know I want to see where this goes, carefully, slowly, with full awareness that it might not work. But I want to try. Madeline's face transformed, hope breaking through like sunrise after a long night. You want to try, she repeated, like she was testing the words to make sure they were real. I want to try. We want to try. Lily and me. We want to see if maybe the 3 figures in her drawing could be more than fantasy, could be something real and sustainable and good. I'm going to mess this up, Madeline warned, multiple times. I'm going to forget how to be vulnerable and revert to control. I'm going to panic when things feel too intense and try to push you away. I'm going to be difficult and complicated and probably occasionally cruel when I'm scared. And I'm going to be stubborn and defensive and sometimes too proud to accept help when I need it, Daniel countered. I'm going to be exhausted from single parenting and broke from medical bills and occasionally resentful that your biggest problem is having too much money, while my biggest problem is never having enough. We're both going to be imperfect and difficult, and we're going to hurt each other sometimes, even when we don't mean to. So we're acknowledging this will be hard. I'm acknowledging this will be real. Real things are always hard. But hard doesn't mean impossible. It just means we have to actually work at it, actually show up for each other, actually choose this every day, even when it would be easier to retreat back to being alone. Madeline stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could see the faint lines around her eyes that she usually concealed with makeup, close enough to notice the slight tremor in her hands that suggested her composure was costing her effort she didn't want to reveal. Reed, she said softly. Daniel, may I kiss you? The question hung between them, weighted with everything they'd survived separately and everything they might build together. Daniel thought about all the reasons to say no. The professional complications, the rushed timeline, the risk of complicating something that was already complicated enough. But he also thought about Lily's drawing, about 3 figures holding hands, about his daughter's absolute certainty that some people were worth the effort of remembering how to be kind. Yes, Daniel said. You may kiss me. Madeline leaned in slowly, giving him time to change his mind, time to pull away,
time to decide this was too much too soon. But Daniel didn't pull away. He met her halfway, their lips touching in a kiss that was tentative and searching, careful in the way two damaged people were always careful when trying to build something new from the wreckage of what they'd lost. The kiss deepened, became less careful and more urgent, years of loneliness meeting years of isolation in the understanding that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to be alone anymore. Daniel's hands found Madeline's waist while hers cupped his face, both of them holding on to each other like they'd finally found something worth holding on to after floating untethered for so long. They broke apart, breathless, foreheads resting together while they remembered how to exist in ordinary space after that moment of extraordinary connection. Around them, the lobby continued its Friday afternoon rhythm. People coming and going, conversations happening, life proceeding normally while Daniel and Madeline tried to process what they'd just done, what they'd just admitted, what they'd just started. That was, Madeline began. Yeah, Daniel agreed. We're really doing this. Apparently we are. People are going to talk. The gossip will be intense. Let them talk. Madeline pulled back enough to look at him directly, her expression mixing wonder and terror in equal measure. You're braver than I am. About this, about us, about choosing connection when you've already lost so much. I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being careful. 3 years is a long time to protect yourself from everything that might hurt. At some point, you have to decide if protection is worth the price of continued isolation. Daniel brushed a strand of hair from Madeline's face, the gesture intimate and natural. And Lily needs to see that love is possible even after loss, that people can choose each other even when it's scary, that family isn't just biology, it's whoever shows up and stays. I'll stay, Madeline promised. However complicated this gets, however difficult I am, however many times I mess this up, I'll stay. Because I want this more than I've wanted anything in over a decade. I want you and Lily and whatever life we can build together. I want to be the person your daughter believes I can be. Then be her, Daniel said simply. Be the person who shows up for Friday lunch. Be the person who cries when a 6-year-old draws you into her family. Be the person who's scared but trying, who's damaged but healing, who's learning that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the only way to actually live, instead of just surviving. They stood together in the lobby for another moment, neither quite willing to separate and return to their respective roles, CEO and employee, authority and subordinate, the positions that defined them professionally but no longer defined them personally. Finally, reluctantly, Madeline stepped back, rebuilding enough composure to face the rest of her workday. Tonight, she said, come to dinner, you and Lily, my place. I'll cook, or I'll have something delivered if cooking proves beyond my current capabilities. I want to do this properly. Introduce you to my space, let Lily see where I live, start building this thing we're trying to build. Daniel thought about the logistics, finding childcare for after hours, explaining to Lily where they were going, navigating the inevitable questions about whether Madeline was his girlfriend now, or if they were still in some undefined territory. But logistics could be managed. This was important. This was Madeline reaching out, inviting them into her private world, offering another piece of her carefully guarded life. Tonight, Daniel agreed. Text me the address. We'll be there. 7 o'clock? 7 o'clock. They parted then, Madeline heading toward the executive elevator while Daniel returned to his desk where he had approximately 90 minutes to complete a full day's remaining work before picking up Lily and navigating their first semi-official date with a woman who'd gone from enemy to friend to something much more complicated in the space of 3 weeks. The afternoon passed in a blur. Daniel worked with divided attention, part of his mind on code and systems while the rest replayed the kiss, analyzed Madeline's confession, tried to process his own feelings which remained complicated and partially unexamined. He was attracted to her, that much was clear. But was he falling in love, or was he just desperately lonely and grateful that someone saw him as more than just a struggling single father? Was this real connection or mutual damage recognizing itself and mistaking shared trauma for compatibility? He didn't know. But he knew Lily was right, that Madeline just needed reminding how to be kind, how to be present, how to show up for people even when it was scary. And he knew he wanted to be one of the people she showed up for,
Wanted to see if maybe three figures holding hands could translate from crayon drawing to actual life, from child's fantasy to adult reality. His phone buzzed at 5:15, a text from Madeline with an address in one of the city's most expensive neighborhoods, the kind of place where doormen wore uniforms and lobbies looked like museum exhibits. Daniel stared at the address, feeling the familiar anxiety about economic disparity, about entering Madeline's world and being reminded constantly of how different their lives were, how much power she wielded while he barely survived. But then another text. I'm nervous too. My apartment is just space, just expensive square footage. What matters is that you and Lily are coming to fill it with something that actually means something. Daniel smiled despite his anxiety. Madeline was learning to read his silences, to anticipate his concerns, to offer reassurance before he had to ask for it. That was intimacy, he thought. Not just physical connection, but emotional attunement, the ability to understand someone's fears and address them without requiring explicit communication. He collected Lily at 5:30, endured her excited questions about where they were going, and drove his newly repaired car across town toward Madeline's address. The building was exactly as intimidating as he'd expected, sleek and modern, with a lobby that featured abstract art and furniture that looked too expensive to actually sit on. The doorman checked his name against a list, made a brief call upstairs, then directed them to a private elevator that served only the penthouse floor. "This is so fancy," Lily whispered as they ascended, her eyes wide with the kind of wonder children brought to experiences beyond their normal frame of reference. "Does Madeline live in a castle?" "Something like that," Daniel replied, his own nerves increasing with every floor they climbed. The elevator opened directly into Madeline's apartment, not a hallway, not a shared landing, but her actual private space. The penthouse stretched out before them, all floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive furniture, and the kind of interior design that suggested professional decorators rather than personal taste. It was beautiful in a cold way, perfect in a way that felt sterile, exactly what Daniel would have expected from someone who'd spent years choosing control over comfort. Madeline appeared from what looked like the kitchen area, and Daniel was struck by how different she looked here. Barefoot, wearing jeans and a soft sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual severe style. She looked younger, more vulnerable, like she'd shed several layers of armor when she'd come home. "You made it," she said, and Daniel heard the relief in her voice, the fear that they might have changed their minds, might have decided this was too complicated after all. "We made it," Daniel confirmed. Lily, showing none of her father's anxiety, walked directly to Madeline and took her hand. "Your house is really pretty," she announced, "but it's really big for just one person. Don't you get lonely?" Leave it to a 6-year-old to immediately identify the core issue. Madeline looked at Lily with an expression that mixed sadness and affection. "Yes," she admitted. "I get very lonely. That's why I'm so happy you're both here." "Well, we're here now," Lily said matter-of-factly. "So you don't have to be lonely anymore, right, Daddy?" "Right," Daniel agreed, taking Madeline's free hand and squeezing gently. "We're here now." And standing in that expensive penthouse, 3 people holding hands like the crayon drawing had prophesied, none of them quite sure how they'd arrived at this moment, but all of them willing to see where it might lead. Daniel, Madeline, and Lily began building something new. Not a replacement for what they'd lost. Not a solution to grief or loneliness or the complicated damage life had inflicted on all of them. Just a beginning, just a possibility. Just 3 people choosing each other despite all the reasons it should have been impossible, proving that sometimes the unlikeliest families were the ones that mattered most. The dinner Madeline had promised turned out to be takeout from an Italian restaurant that charged more for a single entree than Daniel typically spent on groceries for a week. But she'd ordered carefully, consulting with Daniel over text about what Lily would actually eat versus what sounded impressive on a menu, and the result was a spread that felt less like showing off wealth and more like someone genuinely trying to make guests comfortable in unfamiliar territory. They ate at Madeline's dining table, a massive piece of furniture that could have seated 12 but currently held only 3, while Lily narrated a detailed explanation of the social dynamics in her first-grade classroom. Madeline listened with the kind of attention most adults reserve for business presentations, asking clarifying questions about which Emma was the mean one versus the nice one, and whether the boy who kept stealing people's crayons was acting out of malice or undiagnosed impulse control issues. "He's just confused," Lily declared with the authoritative certainty of someone who'd appointed herself classroom psychologist. "His parents got divorced and now he lives in 2 houses, and he doesn't know where his stuff is supposed to be. Mrs. Patterson says sometimes when people are sad inside, they do things that don't make sense outside." Madeline's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Mrs. Patterson sounds very wise." "She is. She knows everything about feelings. She says feelings are like weather. They change all the time and you can't control them, but you can control what you do about them." "That's—" Madeline glanced at Daniel, something vulnerable in her expression. "That's actually profound advice for adults too." After dinner, Lily discovered Madeline's piano, a gorgeous grand piano positioned near the windows with a view of the city lights spreading out like a constellation brought down to earth. It was clearly expensive, clearly well-maintained, and based on the absence of sheet music or personal touches, clearly decorative rather than functional. "Do you play?" Lily asked, running her fingers gently over the keys in a way that suggested Daniel had successfully taught her to respect other people's possessions. "I used to," Madeline said quietly. "Before. I haven't touched it in years." "Why not?" "Because it reminded me of things I didn't want to remember. My son, Gabriel. I used to imagine teaching him piano. I'd sit here and think about his little hands on the keys, about the music we'd make together. After he died, the piano became a monument to all those futures that would never happen." Lily processed this with her characteristic blend of empathy and pragmatism. "But you can't get those futures back by not playing. You're just making yourself sad, and the piano sad. That's double sad instead of just regular sad." Daniel watched Madeline's face as she absorbed his daughter's logic, the kind of simple truth that cut through years of complicated avoidance. "You're right," Madeline said finally. "That is double sad." "So maybe you should play something," Lily suggested. "Not for Gabriel, just for you, because music is nice and you deserve nice things even when you're sad." Madeline looked at Daniel over Lily's head, asking silent permission for something she couldn't quite articulate. Daniel nodded, understanding that this was another wall coming down, another piece of armor being shed, another step toward the person Madeline was trying to remember how to be. She sat at the piano bench, her posture uncertain in a way that contradicted her usual commanding presence. Her hands hovered over the keys for a long moment, before finally settling into position. Then she began to play. Something classical that Daniel vaguely recognized but couldn't name. Something that started soft and melancholy before building into something more hopeful, more alive. Lily climbed onto the bench beside Madeline, watching her hands move across the keys with fascination. And Daniel stood near the windows, looking out at the city while listening to music fill a space that had apparently been silent for over a decade, and felt something shift in his chest, the recognition that this was what healing looked like. Not linear, not clean, not the triumphant arc he'd expected. Just messy and human and real. 3 broken people learning how to be whole together, learning that maybe brokenness wasn't permanent if you let the right people help you remember how to be more than just your wounds. When the piece ended, Lily applauded enthusiastically. "That was so pretty. Can you teach me?" "You want to learn piano?" "Yes. Then we could play together and it would be like a concert and Daddy could watch and everything would be perfect." Madeline's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide this time. "I would love to teach you piano, Lily, if your father agrees." "I agree," Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion he wasn't quite prepared to examine. "I very much agree." They spent the rest of the evening in Madeline's living room, Lily eventually falling asleep on the couch despite her insistence that she wasn't tired. Daniel and Madeline talking in quiet voices about everything and nothing while the city glittered outside the windows like a promise or possibly a warning about the complexity ahead. "This feels surreal," Madeline admitted, watching Lily sleep with an expression Daniel was learning to recognize. Longing mixed with fear, hope mixed with certainty that she'd somehow ruin this if given enough time. 3 weeks ago, I was your worst nightmare. Now your daughter is asleep on my couch and we're talking about piano lessons and She stopped, started again. I'm happier than I've been in over a decade, and I'm terrified that means I'm about to lose it all. Happiness doesn't cause loss, Daniel said gently. Loss just happens sometimes, regardless of how we feel. The question is whether we let fear of potential loss prevent us from experiencing actual joy. When did you get so wise? Around the same time I learned that protecting yourself from pain by refusing to feel anything is just another way of dying. Sarah taught me that before cancer took her. She knew she was dying and she chose to love me and Lily as intensely as possible right up until the end, even though she knew it would make losing her more devastating. She said living scared wasn't living at all. Madeline moved closer to him on the couch, close enough that their shoulders touched, close enough that Daniel could feel her warmth and her tension in equal measure. I don't know how to live unscared, she confessed. I've been scared for so long it feels like my default setting. Scared of being hurt, scared of being vulnerable, scared that anyone who gets close enough to really see me will discover I'm not worth the effort. You're worth the effort, Daniel said, turning to face her directly. You're difficult and complicated, and you're going to mess this up sometimes. But you're also brave enough to try, honest enough to admit when you're scared, and you love my daughter with the kind of fierce protectiveness that tells me you'd do anything to keep her safe. That's worth every bit of effort this requires. I do love her, Madeline whispered. Is that strange? To love someone else's child this quickly, this intensely? I barely know her, but when she climbs into my lap or takes my hand or tells me I'm part of her family, I feel like maybe I get to be a mother after all. Not to Gabriel, not to replace him, but to Lily, if you'll let me. Daniel's throat tightened with emotion that felt too big for his chest. Madeline, He paused, searching for words adequate to the moment. I would be honored to let you be part of Lily's life, to let you love her, and let her love you back. She needs that. She needs to see that family isn't just biology, that people can choose each other and build something real from that choice. And what about us? Madeline asked, her voice barely audible. What are we building? I don't know yet. Something new. Something neither of us has experienced before. Daniel took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. I know I think about you constantly. I know seeing you with Lily makes me believe in possibilities I'd given up on. I know when you kissed me in the lobby, something in my chest unlocked that I thought was permanently closed. Maybe that's the beginning of love. Maybe it's just desperate loneliness recognizing itself. But I want to find out. I want to see where this goes. Even though I'm your boss? Even though people will talk and make assumptions and probably accuse you of sleeping your way to preferential treatment? Let them talk. Let them make their assumptions. I know what this is. Two damaged people trying to build something good from the wreckage of what they've lost. That's not scandalous. That's just human. Madeline leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust that felt more intimate than the kiss they'd shared earlier. I'm going to disappoint you, she said, multiple times. I'm going to be controlling when I'm scared and distant when things feel too intense. I'm going to work too much and forget that relationships require actual maintenance. I'm going to say the wrong thing and hurt Lily's feelings without meaning to and panic because I don't know how to fix it. And I'm going to be oversensitive about money because I've spent 3 years barely surviving while you casually spend more on dinner than I make in a month. I'm going to be exhausted from single parenting and sometimes too tired to be emotionally available the way you need. I'm going to compare you to Sarah without meaning to and feel guilty because grief doesn't disappear just because you start loving someone new. Daniel squeezed her hand. We're both going to be imperfect. The question is whether we're willing to work through the imperfections instead of running away when things get difficult. I'm willing, Madeline said. Terrified, but willing. That's all I'm asking for. Terrified but willing. They sat together in comfortable silence, Daniel's arm eventually moving around Madeline's shoulders while she relaxed into his side, both of them watching Lily sleep and watching the city lights and contemplating the impossible thing they were attempting to build. Around 11, Lily stirred and woke up disoriented, requiring reassurance about where she was and gentle coaxing back toward full consciousness so they could make the drive home. Madeline walked them to the private elevator, Lily clutching Bun Bun and leaning sleepily against her father's leg.
Thank you for coming, Madeline said, directing her words to Lily, even though her eyes kept finding Daniel's. For letting me be part of your evening, for sharing dinner and piano in your company. You're welcome, Lily said through a yawn. Can we come back next week? I would love that. And you'll teach me piano? Every week, if you want. We'll make it part of our routine. Lily seemed satisfied with this arrangement. She hugged Madeline with sleepy affection, then allowed Daniel to guide her into the elevator. But before the doors closed, she turned back with sudden urgency. Madeline? I'm really glad you remembered how to be kind. You're much better at it than you think. The elevator doors slid shut on Madeline's expression, gratitude and pain, and something that looked almost like peace, like she was beginning to believe that maybe she could be the person Lily saw when she looked at her, the person who deserved family and love and second chances despite all the ways she'd failed before. The weekend passed in a blur of normal activities made extraordinary by the knowledge that something fundamental had shifted. Daniel took Lily to the park on Saturday, pushing her on swings while his phone buzzed with text messages from Madeline, observations about her day, questions about whether he and Lily wanted to join her for brunch on Sunday, photos of things she encountered that reminded her of conversations they'd had. It was the digital courtship of two people learning each other's rhythms, learning what made each other laugh or think or feel connected across the distance that separated them when they weren't physically together. Sunday brunch became an extended affair at a restaurant that accommodated Lily's picky eating habits while also serving food that justified its high prices. Madeline seemed more relaxed than Daniel had ever witnessed her, laughing at Lily's jokes, engaging in serious debate about which cartoon character would win in various hypothetical competitions. Looking at Daniel with an expression that suggested she couldn't quite believe this was her life now, sitting in a restaurant with a man and a child, being part of something normal and domestic and utterly divorced from the corporate existence that had defined her for so long. Monday morning brought reality crashing back in the form of office politics and complicated power dynamics. Daniel arrived at work to find the systems engineering department buzzing with barely concealed gossip. Apparently someone had seen him and Madeline in the lobby Friday afternoon, had witnessed the kiss, and the story had spread through the office grapevine with the speed of viral content. By the time Daniel reached his desk, half the department was watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to judgment to something that looked almost like respect. James Chen materialized at his elbow within minutes. So, he said with exaggerated casualness, interesting weekend? Normal weekend, Daniel replied, focusing intently on his computer screen. Right, normal. Because tonguing the CEO in the lobby is totally normal behavior for systems engineers. We weren't. Daniel stopped, realized there was no point denying what multiple people had apparently witnessed. It's complicated. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen is what it is. Daniel, I say this as someone who likes you. What are you thinking? Madeline Cross? The woman who spent 6 months making your life miserable? The woman who literally owns this company and could destroy your career with a single conversation? She's not going to destroy my career. You don't know that. You don't know what happens when this ends badly, and office romances always end badly when there's a massive power imbalance involved. Daniel finally looked up from his screen, meeting James's concern with calm certainty. I know you're worried. I appreciate it. But this isn't what you think it is. It's not a reckless affair or a power play or me trying to sleep my way to better treatment. It's two people who've both lost everything learning how to build something new. And yes, it's complicated and risky and probably inadvisable from an HR perspective, but it's also real and important, and I'm not walking away from it because people might gossip. James studied him for a long moment, then sighed with the resignation of someone who'd given his warning and been ignored. Okay, just be careful. And if you need someone to vouch for your character when HR inevitably gets involved, I'll do it, even though I think you've lost your mind. Appreciated. The morning progressed with Daniel acutely aware of being watched, being discussed, being the subject of speculation that ranged from salacious to concerned. Several colleagues approached with various pretexts for conversation that really amounted to fishing for details about his relationship with Madeline. He deflected with professional courtesy, refusing to provide ammunition for the gossip mill while also refusing to hide or appear ashamed of what was developing between them. At 10:30, his phone buzzed with a message from Madeline. I'm hearing interesting rumors about us. How are you holding up? Daniel typed back, I'm fine. Let them talk. I meant what I said. I'm not hiding this. The board meets this afternoon. Victor Kane has been making noise about inappropriate workplace relationships and conflicts of interest. He's trying to use us as leverage to challenge my leadership. Daniel's stomach dropped. He'd been so focused on the personal aspects of their relationship that he hadn't fully considered the professional implications, not for himself, but for Madeline. She was the CEO of a publicly traded company. Her personal life was subject to scrutiny from boards and shareholders and competitors looking for any weakness to exploit. And now he'd become that weakness, the liability that could undermine everything she'd built. Do you need me to? Daniel started typing, then deleted it. What could he offer? To end things? To pretend Friday hadn't happened? To sacrifice what they were building because a CFO with his own agenda wanted to weaponize their relationship against Madeline's position? Before he could formulate a response, another message arrived. Don't even think about offering to walk away. I'm handling Victor. I'm handling the board. You just handle the gossip and know that I'm fighting for this. For us. With everything I have. Daniel felt something tight in his chest release. She wasn't running. She wasn't sacrificing what they had for professional convenience. She was fighting, using her considerable power and influence to protect not just herself, but what they were trying to build together. I'm fighting too, he sent back. Whatever you need from me, I'm here. I need you to be exactly who you are. The man who showed me kindness when I deserved cruelty. The father who's teaching his daughter that people can change. The person who makes me believe I can be better than my worst impulses. Daniel stared at the message, emotion threatening to overwhelm his professional composure. Around him, the office continued its normal operations, people working, complaining, existing in the mundane reality of corporate employment. But Daniel felt like he was existing in a parallel dimension where everything mattered more intensely, where the stakes were higher than task completion and project deadlines, where love and family and human connection were worth fighting for, even when fighting meant risking everything else. The afternoon brought an unexpected summons to HR. Not Patricia Winters this time, but her assistant director, a man named Thomas Reed who specialized in investigating workplace complaints and potential policy violations. Daniel's hands were shaking slightly as he rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Termination, legal action, forced resignation to protect Madeline's position. Thomas Reed's office was smaller than Patricia's, more functional than impressive, decorated with motivational posters about integrity and teamwork that felt darkly ironic given the circumstances. Thomas himself was younger than Daniel expected, maybe 40, with the kind of neutral expression that suggested he'd perfected the art of revealing nothing while extracting everything. Mr. Reed, thank you for coming on short notice. Thomas gestured to the chair across from his desk. I need to ask you some questions about your relationship with Ms. Cross. Am I required to answer? Daniel asked, trying to remember employment law basics he'd never expected to need. You're not under investigation for misconduct. This is informational only. The board has raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest, and we're gathering facts to address those concerns. You can decline to answer, but cooperation would be appreciated and noted in your file. Daniel sat, his mind working through the implications. The board wanted ammunition against Madeline, and they thought Daniel would provide it, either by confirming inappropriate behavior or by refusing to cooperate in ways that looked suspicious. He was trapped in corporate politics he didn't understand, playing a game with rules he'd never learned. What do you want to know? Daniel asked carefully. The nature of your relationship with Ms. Cross. When it began. Whether any professional favors or preferential treatment have been exchanged. Our relationship is personal, not professional. It began recently, 3 weeks ago, after months of difficult professional interactions that multiple people witnessed. As for preferential treatment, Daniel paused, choosing his words carefully. Ms. Cross reviewed my personnel file and corrected several policy violations that had created a hostile work environment. She was addressing discrimination, not showing favoritism. The timing is convenient. The timing is documented. You can verify with Patricia Winters that the corrections began before our personal relationship started, that they were prompted by Ms. Cross recognizing she'd been part of the hostile environment and choosing to fix it. Thomas made notes,
his expression remaining neutral. There are also questions about your daycare subsidies, the payment restructuring that reduced your cost by 40%. That was a company-wide policy change affecting multiple employees on the sliding scale. I wasn't singled out for special treatment. I just happened to benefit from a more equitable approach to childcare costs. More notes. More neutral assessment. Daniel felt like he was being dissected, every aspect of his relationship with Madeline examined for evidence of corruption or impropriety. It was invasive and humiliating, but he understood it was necessary. That Madeline's enemies would use anything they could find to undermine her, and protecting her meant enduring this scrutiny without compromising either her position or his own integrity. One final question, Thomas said, looking up from his notes. Are you being coerced or pressured into this relationship in any way? Is there any possibility that Ms. Cross is using her position to compel your participation? The question was so absurd that Daniel almost laughed. No, absolutely not. If anything, I pursued the relationship over her initial resistance. She was concerned about the power dynamic and the professional complications. I convinced her to try anyway. And you're certain you're making this choice freely, without fear of professional repercussions if you refuse Ms. Cross's advances? Ms. Cross isn't making advances. We're two adults choosing to explore a relationship despite the complications involved. We're both aware of the risks. We're both committed to maintaining professional boundaries at work while building something personal outside of it. Daniel leaned forward. Look, I understand the board has concerns. I understand this looks suspicious from the outside. But the truth is simple. Madeline and I are damaged people who found each other at a moment when we both desperately needed to remember we were human. That's not scandal. That's not corruption. That's just two lonely people deciding loneliness isn't mandatory. Thomas studied him for a long moment, then closed his notebook. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Reed. That's all I need for now. If we have follow-up questions, we'll contact you through appropriate channels. Daniel left the HR office feeling drained, like he'd run an emotional marathon while maintaining professional composure. His phone buzzed the moment he reached the elevator. Madeline again, checking in without being intrusive, offering support without demanding details he might not be ready to share. How'd it go? She asked simply. I told the truth, Daniel responded. Nothing more, nothing less. Whatever happens from here is out of my control. You're braver than you know. I'm terrified. There's a difference. Bravery is being terrified and doing it anyway. You're doing it anyway. That's the definition of brave. Daniel smiled despite his exhaustion, despite the stress of navigating complications he'd never anticipated. Madeline was learning to offer encouragement instead of criticism, support instead of control. She was growing, changing, becoming the person she'd forgotten she could be. And he was watching it happen in real time, participating in her transformation while experiencing his own, learning to trust again, to risk again, to believe that maybe loss wasn't the inevitable conclusion to every connection. That evening, after collecting Lily from daycare and making it through the bedtime routine, Daniel received a call from Madeline. Not a text, an actual call. Her voice tired but steady when he answered. The board meeting was brutal, she said without preamble. Victor came prepared with everything. Photos of us in the lobby, documentation of the policy changes I implemented, insinuations about corruption and conflicts of interest. He basically accused me of trading professional favors for personal gratification. Madeline, I'm so sorry. Don't apologize. You have nothing to apologize for. She took a breath, and Daniel heard the exhaustion underneath her controlled tone. I defended you. Defended us. I told the board that my personal life is not subject to their approval, that every policy change I implemented was justified and documented, and that if they had concerns about conflicts of interest, we could implement additional oversight, but I would not end a relationship to satisfy their discomfort with CEOs being human. What did they say? They're implementing oversight, independent review of any decisions that directly affect you or your department, mandatory HR reporting if our relationship continues. And Victor is pushing for my resignation, claiming I've compromised my judgment and effectiveness. Daniel's chest tightened with guilt and anger in equal measure. This is my fault. If we hadn't, stop. This isn't your fault. This is Victor being Victor, using any excuse to challenge my leadership because he wants control of the company. If it wasn't our relationship, it would be something else. Some decision he disagreed with, some initiative that threatened his position. You're just convenient ammunition, not the actual cause. Her voice softened. And Daniel? I don't regret it. Not for a second. Even if this costs me everything professionally, I don't regret choosing you and Lily over corporate politics. Don't say that. Don't sacrifice your company for us. I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm defending what matters. There's a difference. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice held something Daniel recognized as fear. But I need you to understand what you're signing up for. This is going to get worse before it gets better. The scrutiny, the gossip, the professional complications. People are going to accuse you of being a gold digger, of using Lily to manipulate me, of sleeping your way to preferential treatment. They're going to make this ugly in ways neither of us can fully anticipate. I know. And you're still willing to do this? To endure all of that for a relationship that's barely 3 weeks old, with a woman who spent months making your life miserable? Daniel thought about Lily's drawing of 3 figures holding hands. He thought about the way Madeline looked when she played piano, when she held his daughter, when she admitted she was falling in love and terrified of what that meant. He thought about Sarah's final words to him, that living scared wasn't living at all, that love was worth any risk because the alternative was existing without actually experiencing anything worth remembering. I'm willing, he said firmly. Whatever comes, however ugly it gets, I'm willing. Because what we're building matters more than gossip or professional complications. Because Lily needs to see that adults can be brave, can choose love even when it's difficult. Because you need someone who will fight for you as hard as you fight for everything else. And because... He paused, then committed completely. Because I think I'm falling in love with you too, Madeline. It's fast and probably inadvisable and terrifying in ways I'm not ready to fully examine. But it's real. And I'm not walking away from something real just because it's complicated. The silence on the other end stretched so long, Daniel wondered if the call had dropped. Then he heard Madeline's breath catch, heard the emotion she was trying to control, heard the years of loneliness cracking under the pressure of being seen and chosen and loved despite every reason she'd convinced herself she didn't deserve any of those things. I love you too, she whispered. I love you and I love Lily, and I'm going to fight for this with everything I have. The board, Victor, the gossip, none of it matters compared to what we're building. Then we fight together, Daniel said. No more isolation, no more handling everything alone. We're in this together, whatever comes next. Together? Madeline agreed. I like the sound of that. They talked for another hour about the board meeting details, about strategies for managing the professional fallout, about plans for the weekend and piano lessons and all the mundane, beautiful details of building a life together despite the obstacles arrayed against them. When they finally said goodnight, Daniel felt simultaneously exhausted and energized, terrified and hopeful, certain that they were attempting something difficult, but equally certain it was worth every bit of difficulty involved. The rest of the week proceeded with uncomfortable awareness of being watched. Daniel felt eyes on him constantly at work, colleagues assessing, judging, speculating about his relationship with Madeline and what it meant for office dynamics. Several people stopped speaking when he entered rooms. Others made pointed comments about recent policy changes that just happened to benefit certain employees. The hostility was subtle but pervasive, a reminder that their relationship existed within a system that punished deviation from established hierarchies. But there were allies too. James, despite his concerns, defended Daniel in conversations he only heard about secondhand. Patricia Winters made a point of stopping by his desk to inform him that every policy change had been properly vetted and documented, that if anyone questioned his treatment, she would personally explain the justification. Even some of his fellow engineers offered quiet support, acknowledging that everyone deserved happiness, that judging someone's personal life was inappropriate regardless of corporate politics. Friday lunch with Lily became a refuge from the stress. 30 minutes where none of the complications mattered, where Madeline could be just Madeline instead of embattled CEO, where Daniel could be just dad instead of controversial employee. Lily had made a new drawing, this time showing all 3 of them at a piano with musical notes floating around their heads and smiles on all their faces. She presented it to Madeline with the pride of someone offering treasure. "This is beautiful, Lily," Madeline said, her voice thick with emotion. "Is this from your imagination, or did you draw something you want to happen?" "Both," Lily announced. "I imagined it, but I want it to be real too. Can we make it real?" "Yes," Madeline promised. "This weekend, all three of us at the piano. I'll teach you the basics and your father can watch, and we'll make this drawing come to life." "And we'll all be happy?" "Yes, sweetheart, we'll all be happy." Lily seemed satisfied with this plan. She climbed into Madeline's lap with the casual affection of someone who'd already decided this particular adult was safe, was family, was permanent despite all the adult complications swirling around them. And watching his daughter trust someone this completely, watching Madeline hold her like she was precious and fragile and worth protecting at any cost, Daniel felt certainty settle in his chest. A bone-deep knowledge that whatever battles they had to fight, whatever obstacles the world put in their path, the three of them were building something that mattered, something worth protecting, something that would endure because they'd chosen each other with full awareness of the cost involved. Later that afternoon, Daniel received an email marked urgent from the executive office. His heart rate spiked immediately. More HR investigation, more board drama, more complications he'd have to navigate. But when he opened the message, he found something entirely different. It was from Madeline, but formatted as an official company communication. The subject line read, "Executive leadership changes and policy updates." Daniel scanned the content quickly, his eyes widening with each paragraph. Madeline had announced significant changes to the company's oversight structure, implementing the independent review board the directors had demanded, creating additional checks on executive authority, and most dramatically proposing that she step back from day-to-day operations while maintaining her CEO title and strategic vision. She was effectively restructuring her own role to address concerns about concentrated power and potential conflicts of interest. The email continued with policy updates about workplace relationships, new guidelines that applied to all employees, not just executives, creating clear protocols for disclosure and oversight when personal relationships develop between colleagues at any level. It was comprehensive, professional, and clearly designed to demonstrate that she was taking the board's concerns seriously while also protecting her right to a personal life. But the final paragraph stopped Daniel's breath completely. "These changes reflect my commitment to cross-industries and to maintaining the highest standards of corporate governance. They also reflect my commitment to building a life that includes more than professional achievement. I've spent over a decade believing that success required sacrificing personal happiness. I was wrong. Effective leadership requires being fully human, and being fully human requires connection, vulnerability, and the courage to build relationships even when they're complicated. I'm grateful to everyone who has supported these changes and to those willing to trust that I can be both an effective CEO and a woman learning how to have a family again." It was the most personal thing Daniel had ever seen Madeline write in a professional context, a public acknowledgement of their relationship, of her intentions, of her willingness to fight for what they were building, even when fighting meant restructuring her entire professional existence. His phone buzzed. "Too much?" Daniel typed back. "Perfect. Brave. Exactly what was needed." The board approved it. Victor voted against, but he was outnumbered. "We have breathing room now. We have space to build this properly without constant crisis management." "I love you," Daniel sent, because sometimes the simplest truths were the only ones that mattered. "I love you too. Now go collect our daughter and come to my place. I promised we'd make her drawing real, and I don't break promises to 6-year-olds. Our daughter." The words sang through Daniel's chest, settling into spaces that had been empty since Sarah's death. Madeline had claimed Lily, not possessively or presumptuously, but with the kind of certainty that came from knowing this child had chosen her, and she was choosing back, was committing to being present and active in her life regardless of what happened between her and Daniel. That evening, they made good on the promise. All three of them crowded onto the piano bench while Madeline taught Lily the basics: hand position, simple scales, the names of notes that corresponded to the keys. Lily was enchanted, her small fingers carefully mimicking Madeline's movements, her concentration absolute in the way children focused when something mattered deeply to them. And Daniel watched from the nearby couch, his phone capturing photos and video, documenting this moment when his daughter learned music from a woman who was learning how to be part of a family again. When three people who had no business working as a unit somehow created harmony from their combined brokenness.
Later, after Lily had fallen asleep in one of Madeline's guest rooms, because leaving had felt wrong and staying had felt right, and sometimes you just surrendered to what felt natural instead of what seemed appropriate. Daniel and Madeline sat together on her balcony overlooking the city. The night was cold but clear, stars visible despite the light pollution, the world spread out below them like possibility rendered in streetlights and building windows. "I meant what I said in the email," Madeline said quietly, "about learning to have a family again, about you and Lily being my family, if you'll have me permanently instead of just tentatively." Daniel turned to face her, seeing vulnerability and determination in equal measure on her face. Permanently is a big word. "I know, but I've spent enough time being tentative, being careful, protecting myself from pain by refusing to fully commit to anything except work. I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to be the person who shows up for Friday lunch every week, who teaches piano lessons, who kisses you goodnight and means it when I say I love you." She took his hand. "I want to be Lily's second mother, if you'll let me. Not replacing Sarah, I could never replace her, but being present and active in her life, being someone she can count on unconditionally." "Madeline, I know it's fast. I know we've only been doing this for 3 weeks, but I also know that I'm 42 years old and I've been alone for over a decade, and I don't want to waste any more time being careful when I could be building something real with people I love." Her grip on his hand tightened. "So I'm asking, not for a response right now, not for commitment before you're ready. Just asking if you can imagine a future where the three of us are permanent, where we're actually a family, instead of just people trying to figure out if family is possible." Daniel looked out at the city, at the millions of lives being lived in those lit windows, at all the different ways people constructed meaning and connection in a world that seemed designed to keep everyone isolated. He thought about Lily's drawings, about three figures holding hands, about a child's certainty that some things were simple even when adults made them complicated. He thought about Sarah and what she'd want for him and Lily, and he knew with absolute certainty she'd want them to be happy, to be loved, to build a new family, not as replacement but as continuation, proof that love didn't end with death, that you could honor what you'd lost while also embracing what you'd found. "I can imagine it," Daniel said finally. "I can imagine Friday lunches becoming permanent tradition, piano lessons becoming weekly ritual, you being present for school performances and scraped knees and teenage drama years from now. I can imagine loving you not just in the early stages when everything feels intense, but in the boring middle stages when we're just existing together, when the dramatic gestures give way to daily maintenance of choosing each other over and over. I can imagine all of it, Madeline, and it terrifies me and excites me in equal measure. So we try. We commit to trying, to building this properly even though it's scary and complicated. We try. We commit. We build this together, whatever shape it takes, however long it takes to feel stable instead of precarious." Madeline leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together in comfortable silence while the city continued its endless motion below them. Inside, Lily slept peacefully in the guest room that would gradually become her room, filling with toys and artwork and the evidence of a child who'd claimed this space as hers. And tomorrow they would face whatever complications came next: board politics, office gossip, the logistics of blending lives that had been separate for so long. But tonight, they were just three people learning how to be family, learning that broken pieces could fit together if you were patient enough to find the right configuration, brave enough to risk the sharp edges, and committed enough to keep trying even when it hurt. The week had brought crisis and resolution in equal measure. The next week would bring different challenges, different obstacles to navigate together. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. They had chosen each other. And sometimes, Daniel thought, that was enough to build on. Sometimes choosing was the beginning, and everything else was just the work of honoring that choice day after day, moment after moment, through whatever came next. The following weeks tested their resolve in ways neither Daniel nor Madeline had fully anticipated. The board's oversight committee became a constant presence in their professional lives, reviewing decisions, questioning judgment calls, scrutinizing every interaction between them at work with the kind of suspicious attention that made even innocent conversations feel dangerous.
Victor Kane continued his campaign against Madeline's leadership, using every board meeting as an opportunity to suggest her personal relationship had compromised her effectiveness, that the company needed fresh leadership unburdened by romantic distractions. But something unexpected happened as the pressure increased. The employees, the people who actually worked at Cross Industries beyond the executive suite and boardroom politics, began pushing back. It started small. A petition circulating through the systems engineering department defending Daniel's integrity and work performance. Then other departments joined, adding their voices to the growing chorus of support. People who'd never spoken to Daniel directly signed statements affirming that the policy changes Madeline had implemented were long overdue corrections of existing problems, not favoritism disguised as reform. James Chen, despite his initial concerns, became an unlikely advocate. "Look," he told Daniel one afternoon when the stress was particularly overwhelming, "I thought you'd lost your mind dating the CEO. But watching how this is playing out, watching her fight for you, watching you handle the scrutiny with dignity, watching both of you maintain professionalism while also refusing to hide like you're doing something wrong, it's changing how people think about workplace relationships and power dynamics. You're making it okay for people to be human at work, to have complicated lives that don't fit neat corporate categories." Daniel hadn't considered that perspective, that their visibility, their refusal to hide or apologize for loving each other, might be creating space for others to exist more authentically in an environment that usually demanded everyone compartmentalize their humanity. It was a strange kind of activism, unintentional, but apparently meaningful to people who'd spent years believing work required sacrificing personal identity at the office threshold. The real challenge came 6 weeks after that board meeting when Victor made his most aggressive move yet. He called an emergency board session, presenting evidence he claimed demonstrated Madeline had approved a major contract with a vendor who happened to be Daniel's former college roommate, a connection Victor framed as corruption, nepotism, proof that Madeline's judgment had been irreversibly compromised by her relationship. Madeline called Daniel that night from her office, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Victor found the Richardson contract from 2 months ago. Before we were even together, before any of this started. But he's framing it like I approved it as a favor to you, like I'm funneling company money to your friends." "Tom Richardson and I haven't spoken in 5 years, Daniel said, his own anger rising. "We were roommates freshman year and then we drifted apart. I didn't even know his company bid on that contract until you're telling me right now." "I know. The Oversight Committee knows. Everyone with access to the timeline knows Victor is manufacturing a scandal, but he's good at creating doubt, at making people question what they know to be true. He's suggesting that maybe you rekindled the friendship. Maybe I was already interested in you back then. Maybe this whole thing has been happening longer than we've admitted. That's insane. That's Victor. He deals in plausible doubt, not truth. And the board," her voice cracked slightly, "half of them want to believe him because it gives them an excuse to replace me with someone more traditional, someone who won't challenge their comfortable assumptions about how CEOs should behave." Daniel could hear the exhaustion underneath her anger, the accumulated weight of weeks of fighting battles on multiple fronts, while also trying to build a relationship and be present for Lily. Madeline was strong, but everyone had limits. Everyone eventually reached the point where fighting felt futile, where surrendering seemed like the only way to stop the relentless pressure. "What do you need from me?" Daniel asked quietly. "I need you to trust that I'm going to fix this. I need you to keep being exactly who you are, showing up for work, being present for Lily, not letting Victor's manufactured drama change how you live your life." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice held something harder, more determined. "And I need you to be ready for what comes next. Because I'm done playing defense. I'm done letting Victor dictate the terms of engagement. It's time to go on offense." The following Monday, Madeline called another emergency board meeting, but this time she was the one who'd requested it, who'd set the agenda, who'd prepared the presentation that would either secure her position or end her tenure as CEO. She didn't tell Daniel the details, just kissed him goodbye that morning with fierce intensity and whispered that she loved him regardless of what happened in the next few hours. Daniel spent the morning unable to focus on work, checking his phone compulsively for updates that didn't come. Around him, the office buzzed with speculation about the meeting. Someone had leaked that Madeline was making a major announcement,
that the balance of power between her and Victor was about to shift decisively, one direction or the other. People placed bets on outcomes, discussed contingency plans if leadership changed, performed all the small rituals of employees bracing for organizational upheaval. At 11:30, Daniel's phone finally buzzed. "It's done. Come to the executive conference room. I want you to hear this directly." Daniel's hands were shaking as he rode the elevator to the 49th floor, past his usual stop, into the rarefied territory of executive leadership, where decisions got made that affected hundreds of lives. Madeline's assistant waved him through with a tight smile that suggested she knew something significant had just occurred, but wasn't authorized to share details. The executive conference room was empty except for Madeline, who stood at the windows looking out at the city with her back to the door. She turned when Daniel entered, and he saw her face was composed, but her eyes were red-rimmed, evidence of tears she'd already shed or was still fighting to contain. "What happened?" Daniel asked, moving toward her. "I gave them an ultimatum," Madeline said. "Not the board, Victor specifically. I told him I'd been investigating his financial dealings for the past month, that I had documentation of several questionable transactions that violated company policy and possibly securities law. Nothing definitive yet, but enough to raise serious concerns that would require extensive auditing and potential legal action. You threatened him. I gave him a choice. He could resign quietly, citing personal reasons, and I would ensure the investigation concluded without criminal referrals. Or he could continue his campaign against me, and I would release everything I'd found to the board and let the legal process proceed naturally." Madeline's jaw tightened. "He chose resignation, effective immediately. He's already cleaning out his office." Daniel stared at her, trying to process what she'd done. Madeline had weaponized her power, used her position and resources to eliminate a threat through tactics that were legally defensible but morally complicated. She'd become exactly the kind of ruthless executive she'd spent years being before Lily and Daniel had entered her life, before she'd started remembering how to be human instead of just successful. "You're upset with me," Madeline said, reading his expression. "You think I went too far." "I think—" Daniel paused, searching for honest words that wouldn't sound like judgment. "I think you did what you thought was necessary. I'm just wondering if this is who you want to be. Someone who solves problems through intimidation and power plays. Someone who wins by destroying opponents instead of proving them wrong." "He was trying to destroy us, Daniel. He was manufacturing evidence and lying to the board and doing everything he could to force me out so he could take control of the company." "What was I supposed to do? Keep playing by rules he'd already abandoned? Keep being vulnerable while he weaponized every piece of our lives against us?" "No, Daniel moved closer, taking her hands. "I just want to make sure you're okay with the person you had to become to win this fight. Because I've watched you change over these past weeks. I've watched you remember how to be kind, how to be vulnerable, how to let people in. And I don't want you to lose that by reverting to the version of yourself that solved everything through control and power." Madeline's face crumpled, her careful composure finally breaking completely. "I hated doing it. I hated investigating him, hated finding the evidence, hated giving him that ultimatum. I felt like every terrible thing I was before, the Ice Queen CEO who values winning over humanity, who treats people as obstacles to be removed rather than humans with their own complicated lives." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "But I didn't know what else to do. He was going to keep attacking until he either destroyed my career or destroyed us. And I couldn't let him destroy us. I couldn't lose you and Lily because I was too principled to fight dirty." Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried against his shoulder. Around them, the conference room was silent except for her muffled sobs and the ambient hum of the building's mechanical systems. Through the windows, the city continued its indifferent motion. Millions of people living their lives, completely unaware that in this room, two people were grappling with the eternal question of whether the ends justified the means, whether protecting what you loved required becoming someone you didn't want to be. "You did what you had to do," Daniel said finally. "I don't agree with all of it, and I think you're going to need to examine whether this is the last time or whether you've opened a door you can't close again. But I understand why you did it, and I'm not leaving you because you made a hard choice in an impossible situation. Even though I'm not sure I made the right choice, especially because you're not sure. The fact that you're questioning yourself, that you hate what you had to do, that tells me you're still the person I fell in love with. The person who's learning to value people over power, connection over control. You just stumbled. That's allowed. That's human. Madeline pulled back enough to look at him, her face blotchy from crying, but her eyes clearing. What if I stumble again? What if the next crisis comes and I revert to old patterns, to solving problems through intimidation instead of integrity? Then I'll call you on it. I'll remind you who you're trying to be, and you'll do the same for me when I'm too proud or too defensive or too convinced my way is the only right way. Daniel cupped her face gently. That's what partners do. They keep each other accountable. They challenge each other to be better. They love each other enough to be honest, even when honesty is uncomfortable. Partners, Madeline repeated softly. I like that. Good, because that's what we are. Not CEO and employee anymore, just two people trying to build something good while navigating all the complications that come with being human and flawed and still learning. They stood together in the conference room for several more minutes, neither speaking, both processing what had happened and what it meant for their future. Victor's resignation would create space for them to breathe, would remove the immediate threat to Madeline's position. But it didn't solve the underlying complexity of their relationship, didn't erase the power dynamics that would always exist between them as long as she was CEO and he was an employee, didn't make the scrutiny disappear or the gossip stop. I've been thinking, Madeline said eventually, pulling away to pace the room with nervous energy, about restructuring my role further. Not just the Oversight Committee's recommendations, but something more significant. Stepping back from CEO entirely, moving to chairman of the board where I'd maintain strategic vision but not day-to-day operational control. Daniel felt his stomach drop. You'd give up being CEO? After everything you've built? After fighting this hard to maintain your position? I'd be giving up a title, not my influence or involvement. But yes, I'd be acknowledging that maybe being CEO is incompatible with being the kind of partner and parent I want to be. That maybe I can't do both at the level they deserve to be done. She stopped pacing, facing him directly. I want to be present for Lily's childhood. I want to attend school performances and help with homework and be there for dinner instead of working until 9 every night. I want to be available to you without constantly managing crises or fighting board battles. And I'm starting to realize that might mean choosing differently than I've chosen for the past decade. Madeline, I can't ask you to give up your career for us. You're not asking, I'm choosing. There's a difference. Her expression was calm, certain in a way that suggested she'd been contemplating this longer than just today. I've been CEO for 8 years. I've proven everything I needed to prove. I've built an empire and made myself indispensable and sacrificed my personal life on the altar of professional achievement. And for what? So I could die alone in this building, surrounded by success but completely isolated from anything that actually matters? That's not the only option. We can figure out how to balance. I don't want to balance anymore. I don't want to spend the next 20 years trying to be adequate at everything instead of excellent at the things that actually matter. I want to be an excellent partner to you. I want to be an excellent mother to Lily. And if that means being an adequate chairman instead of an excellent CEO, that's a trade I'm willing to make. Daniel studied her face, searching for doubt or resentment or signs that she was making this decision for wrong reasons. Guilt, pressure, the belief that women had to choose between professional success and personal fulfillment in ways men never did. But he saw only clarity, the kind of certainty that came from finally understanding what you actually wanted instead of what you'd been conditioned to pursue. Are you sure? He asked. Because I need you to be absolutely certain this is what you want, not what you think I need you to do. Because I fell in love with Madeline Cross, the CEO, the woman who commanded rooms and made difficult decisions and built something extraordinary. I don't need you to be less than that to be with me. I know, but maybe I need to be different than that to be with myself. To be someone I can respect when I look in the mirror, someone whose life has meaning beyond quarterly earnings and shareholder value. She moved closer, taking both his hands. This isn't about you or Lily asking me to change. This is about me realizing I've been living the wrong life, chasing the wrong definition of success, and I finally have the courage to choose differently. When would this happen? 6 months. Time to transition, to identify a successor, to ensure the company is stable under new leadership, and time for us to figure out what our life looks like when I'm not constantly fighting fires and managing crises. She paused.
Time to plan a wedding, if you'll have me. The words hung between them, monumental and terrifying and absolutely right. Daniel's heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. They'd been together barely 2 months. Not enough time by conventional standards, not nearly enough time to make lifetime commitments. But Daniel had learned through Sarah's death that time wasn't guaranteed, that waiting for perfect timing meant sometimes never getting to experience what mattered most. "Are you proposing to me?" Daniel asked, his voice unsteady. "I'm proposing that we stop pretending this is tentative or experimental or something we're just trying out. I'm proposing that we commit fully, marriage, family, building a life together that acknowledges Lily as our daughter, not just yours, and any future children we might have as ours together." Madeline's voice was fierce with certainty. "I'm 42 years old. I've wasted enough time being careful. I want to marry you, Daniel Reed. I want to be Lily's mother legally and officially. I want to wake up every morning knowing I chose love over fear, people over power, a real life over a perfectly controlled existence." Daniel felt tears burning his eyes. "I want that too," he said hoarsely. "All of it. But Madeline, are you sure you've thought this through? The practical aspects, the implications, what it means for Lily to have someone who isn't her biological mother taking on that role?" "I've thought about nothing else for weeks, and I've talked to child psychologists about how to approach this respectfully, honoring Sarah's memory while also being present in Lily's life. I know I can't replace her mother. I would never try. But I can be her mother too, a second mother, an additional source of love and support and stability. If Lily wants that, if you'll let me try." "I think," Daniel's voice cracked, "I think Sarah would have wanted this for Lily, for both of us. She always said life was for living fully, for embracing joy whenever it appeared regardless of how it complicated the narrative we'd constructed for ourselves. And this, us, this is joy, Madeline. Complicated and messy and sometimes painful, but joy nonetheless." "So yes, you'll marry me?" "On one condition." Madeline's face flickered with anxiety. "What condition?" "That we tell Lily first, that we make sure she's comfortable with this, that she wants me to marry you, that she understands what it means and gets to participate in the decision instead of just being informed about it after adults have already decided." Daniel squeezed her hands. "She's 6 years old, but this affects her life fundamentally. She deserves to have a voice in something this important." Relief and love transformed Madeline's expression. "Of course, yes. We'll tell her together, we'll answer all her questions, and if she needs time to adjust to the idea, we'll take all the time she needs. Her comfort and happiness matter more than any timeline we might prefer." They left the executive conference room together, and for the first time in weeks, Daniel felt like they were moving forward instead of just defending their position. Victor was gone. Madeline had a plan that would allow her to be present in ways she couldn't be as CEO. And they were going to build a family, formally, officially, with full awareness of what they were choosing and why it mattered. That evening, they picked up Lily from daycare together. She was delighted to see both of them, chattering about her day while they drove to Madeline's penthouse. Over dinner, pizza that Lily had helped choose, eating at the kitchen counter instead of the formal dining table because Lily had declared that families didn't need to be fancy all the time. They found the moment to have the conversation that would determine their future. "Lily, sweetheart," Daniel began carefully, "Madeline and I need to talk to you about something important, something that affects all three of us." Lily looked up from her pizza, suddenly serious in the way children got when they sensed adult gravity. "Okay?" Madeline reached across the counter, taking Lily's hand. "Your father and I love each other very much, and we both love you more than anything in the world. We want to be a family, a real permanent family, which means your father and I would get married and I would become your mother. Not replacing your first mother, never replacing her, but being an additional mother, someone who loves you and takes care of you and will always be there for you." "Would I have to call you Mom?" Lily asked with characteristic directness. "You could call me whatever feels right to you, Mom, Madeline, some combination, whatever makes you comfortable. The title doesn't matter as much as the relationship." Lily thought about this, her face scrunched in concentration. "Would I still live with Daddy?" "You'd live with both of us," Daniel said. "We'd all live together, in a house that belongs to all three of us.
You'd have your own room, your own space, but we'd be a family unit instead of you and me visiting Madeline sometimes. What about my first mom? Would she be sad that I have a new mom? The question broke Daniel's heart. He'd been preparing for it, had discussed with Madeline how to address Sarah's memory respectfully, while also making space for new relationships. But hearing Lily articulate the concern so directly made it real in ways theoretical discussion never did. I think your first mom would be happy, Daniel said gently. I think she'd be glad you have someone else who loves you as much as Madeline does. Someone who will be there for school performances and homework help and all the everyday moments that matter. Your mom wanted you to be loved and happy. Having Madeline in your life doesn't mean forgetting your first mom or loving her less. It just means your heart is big enough to hold love for both of them. Lily absorbed this wisdom with visible concentration. Can I think about it? She asked finally. Not for long, but just like tonight? To make sure it feels right? Of course, Madeline said immediately. This is a big decision. Take all the time you need. That night, Lily insisted on sleeping in the guest room at Madeline's penthouse instead of going back to the apartment. Daniel tucked her in, read her extra stories, answered questions about what their life would look like if she said yes to this new family configuration. And then, just as he was about to leave, Lily spoke into the darkness. Daddy, I already know my answer. I don't need to wait until tomorrow. Daniel's heart stopped. What's your answer, sweetheart? Yes. I want Madeline to be my mom. I want us to be a family for real. Lily's voice was clear, certain, uncomplicated by adult anxieties about timing or appropriateness. She makes you happy. She makes me happy. And I think my first mom would like her because she's kind even when she's scared and she tries really hard to do the right thing even when it's difficult. Daniel felt tears streaming down his face. Are you sure? I'm sure. When can we tell her? Right now, if you want. Lily was out of bed immediately, running through the penthouse in her pajamas to find Madeline, who was sitting on the balcony staring at the city lights with an expression of profound anxiety. Lily launched herself into Madeline's lap without preamble. I want you to be my mom, Lily announced. Forever. Not just trying it out, but actually forever. Is that okay? Madeline's face transformed, joy and relief and gratitude overwhelming her usual control. She held Lily close, her entire body shaking with suppressed emotion. That is more than okay, she managed through tears. That is the greatest honor anyone has ever given me. I promise I'll be the best mother I know how to be. I'll make mistakes sometimes, but I'll always love you and always be there for you. Always. I know, Lily said, with the simple confidence of someone who'd never doubted that truth. That's why I said yes. Daniel joined them on the balcony, and they held each other. This new family, this impossible configuration of three people who had no business working together, but somehow created something beautiful from their combined damage and hope and willingness to try. Below them, the city continued its endless motion. But up here, in this moment, time seemed to pause long enough for them to fully experience the weight of what they'd just committed to. The magnitude of the choice to build family from choice rather than biology, from love rather than obligation. The following months proceeded with the kind of intentional construction that came from people who understood they were building something important. Madeline officially announced her transition from CEO to chairman of the board, citing a desire to focus on strategic vision while allowing fresh leadership to manage daily operations. The business press speculated endlessly about her motivations, but Madeline refused to engage with the speculation, simply stating that after 8 years as CEO, she was ready for a different kind of challenge. The employee response was mixed, but largely positive. People who'd worked under Madeline's demanding leadership were relieved to have someone potentially more approachable in the CEO role. Others worried about the company's direction without her daily involvement. But the transition was handled professionally. The new CEO, a brilliant woman named Sarah Chen, who'd been COO for 3 years, brought her own vision while respecting Madeline's legacy, and Cross Industries continued thriving under the new leadership structure. Daniel and Madeline met with family lawyers to navigate the complex process of Madeline adopting Lily. Because Sarah had been Lily's biological mother and Daniel had sole custody, the process was relatively straightforward legally, though emotionally complicated. They wanted to honor Sarah's memory while also formalizing Madeline's role in Lily's life. The solution they developed was a memorial ceremony before the adoption was finalized, gathering at Sarah's grave with Lily, talking about Sarah's life and love, and symbolically asking her blessing for this new family configuration. Lily spoke to the gravestone with heartbreaking sincerity. "Hi, Mom. It's me, Lily. You probably know I'm getting a new mom. Her name is Madeline, and she's really nice, and she loves me a lot, and she loves Daddy too. I just wanted to make sure you're okay with it, because I'll always be your daughter first, but I think I can be Madeline's daughter too. Daddy says hearts are big enough to love lots of people at once. Is that okay?" The only answer was wind rustling through autumn leaves, but Lily seemed satisfied that she'd received permission. She placed flowers on Sarah's grave, purple ones, naturally, and took Madeline's hand with the certainty of someone who understood she was honoring the past while embracing the future. The adoption was finalized 3 months after Madeline's proposal. They celebrated quietly, just the three of them at dinner, no grand announcement, no public spectacle. But that night, Madeline tucked Lily into bed in their new house, a place they'd chosen together, not as grand as Madeline's penthouse, but warm and lived in, and designed for family rather than impressing visitors. And Lily called her Mom for the first time. "Good night, Mom," Lily said sleepily, and Madeline broke down crying right there in the doorway, overwhelmed by hearing the word she'd thought she'd never have the right to claim. The wedding happened on a Saturday in early autumn, exactly 1 year after that first coffee meeting where they'd tentatively explored what they might build together. It was small, just close friends, a few family members, colleagues who'd become genuine supporters rather than just professional acquaintances. They married in a park where Daniel used to bring Lily after Sarah's death, where he'd pushed her on swings and tried to piece together a life from the fragments loss had left him. Lily was their flower girl, wearing a purple dress she'd chosen herself and carrying a basket of mixed flowers. Some for the ceremony, others to place on Sarah's grave afterward, maintaining the connection between past and present, honoring what had been while celebrating what was becoming. Patricia Winters from HR officiated, speaking eloquently about love's capacity to heal, about choosing family rather than inheriting it, about the courage required to build something new from the ruins of what you'd lost. When it came time for vows, Daniel spoke directly to Madeline with his voice shaking but steady. "A year ago, I thought I knew what my life was. Surviving, protecting Lily, accepting that happiness was something that happened to other people. You taught me I was wrong. You taught me that people can change, that cruelty can transform into kindness, that someone who seems incapable of love might just be protecting themselves from the pain love can bring. You chose us when you could have chosen power. You chose vulnerability when you could have chosen control. You chose to be human when it would have been easier to remain invulnerable. I love you for all of it, the choices you made, the person you're becoming, the mother you've already proven yourself to be. I promise to choose you every day, to call you forward when you're tempted to retreat, to love you through the difficult moments as fiercely as I love you in the easy ones." Madeline's voice was rough with emotion when she responded, "I spent over a decade believing the only thing worth pursuing was success, that personal happiness was a luxury I couldn't afford after loss destroyed my first attempt at family. You and Lily proved me wrong about everything. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that letting people in doesn't inevitably lead to pain, that I could be both strong and soft, both powerful and human. Daniel, you saw me at my absolute worst, cruel, controlling, using power to mask pain, and you offered me kindness anyway. You gave me grace I didn't deserve and space to become someone I could respect. And Lily," she turned to look at their daughter, standing nearby with her flower basket and gap-toothed smile. "Lily, you drew me into your family before I had any right to be there. You decided I was worth saving, and you refused to accept my rejection of that gift. You taught me that love is simple when you stop overthinking it, that family is who shows up and stays, and that even people who've forgotten how to be kind can remember if someone believes in them enough. I promise to be the mother and wife you both deserve, to show up every day, to choose presence over perfection, to love you both with everything I have." They exchanged rings, simple bands, nothing ostentatious, physical reminders that they'd chosen each other and would keep choosing each other through whatever came next. When Patricia pronounced them married, Lily cheered louder than anyone, running forward to hug them both, while the small gathering applauded and the autumn sun broke through clouds like blessing or possibly just weather, but beautiful either way. The reception was casual, cake and champagne in the park pavilion, music from a local string quartet, conversations that flowed naturally rather than following formal wedding reception scripts. James Chen gave a toast that managed to be both funny and sincere, talking about watching Daniel and Madeline transform from antagonists to partners, from people committed to isolation to people brave enough to risk connection. Mrs. Patterson from the daycare spoke about Lily's certainty from the very beginning that Madeline just needed reminding how to be kind, and how that 6-year-old wisdom had proven more accurate than any adult analysis. As evening approached and the celebration wound down, Daniel found himself standing at the edge of the park with Madeline, watching Lily play with several children who'd attended the wedding. Their daughter, both of theirs now, legally and emotionally, was laughing with the unself-conscious joy of someone who felt secure and loved, and certain that her family was permanent rather than provisional. "Did you ever imagine this?" Madeline asked quietly. "When you were enduring my daily cruelty, did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" "Never, not even in my most optimistic moments." Daniel took her hand. "But I'm glad we did. I'm glad Lily was stubborn enough to believe in you when I'd given up. I'm glad you were brave enough to admit you were tired of being cruel. I'm glad we both chose to try when every logical reason said we shouldn't." "It wasn't logical," Madeline agreed. "It was terrifying and impractical and probably inadvisable from every conventional perspective. But it was also the best decision I've ever made. Choosing you and Lily over everything else I thought mattered. Choosing family over empire, love over power, being human over being invulnerable." They stood together watching Lily play, watching the sun set over the park where their new life had officially begun. Both of them acutely aware of how lucky they were, not because everything had been easy, but because they'd been willing to work through the difficulty, to fight for what they were building, to believe that damaged people could help each other heal if they were patient and honest and committed to trying. Later that night, after the wedding guests had departed and Lily had been put to bed exhausted from excitement, Daniel and Madeline sat in the living room of their new house. Around them were the accumulated artifacts of their combined lives. Daniel's modest furniture mixed with some of Madeline's expensive pieces, Lily's artwork covering the walls, family photos already displayed despite their family being barely a year old. It looked lived in and comfortable, and absolutely nothing like the sterile perfection of Madeline's penthouse or the barely surviving poverty of Daniel's old apartment. "This is what home feels like," Madeline said, looking around the room with wonder. "I'd forgotten. All those years in the penthouse, surrounded by expensive things, I never felt at home. But here, with your worn couch and Lily's toys scattered everywhere, and the kitchen that needs updating, this feels like home." "Because it's ours," Daniel said simply. "Not yours or mine, but ours together. That's what makes it home." Madeline curled into his side, and they sat in comfortable silence while the house settled around them, and the neighborhood quieted into evening routines. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Upstairs, Lily shifted in sleep, her movements audible through the old house's thin walls. Outside, the world continued its complicated existence, full of pain and joy, loss and discovery, people struggling and succeeding and failing and trying again. But inside this house, 3 people had built something that mattered. Not perfect, not without ongoing challenges, but real and sustainable and rooted in the kind of love that chose to show up every day regardless of how difficult showing up became. They were proof that broken pieces could fit together, that grief didn't have to be permanent, that families could be built from choice and courage rather than just biology and circumstance. In the months and years that followed, their life would have its share of difficulties. Madeline would occasionally revert to old patterns when stressed, becoming controlling or distant before remembering to be present and vulnerable. Daniel would struggle with money anxiety even when financial stress was no longer their reality, with pride that made accepting help difficult, with grief that resurged unexpectedly on anniversaries and holidays. Lily would navigate the complexity of having 2 mothers, one in memory, one present, with remarkable grace but also occasional confusion about how to honor both without feeling disloyal to either. But they would navigate those difficulties together, with honesty and patience and the understanding that healing wasn't linear, that growth required setbacks, that loving each other meant accepting imperfection while also calling each other forward toward better versions of themselves. They would attend therapy individually and as a family, would learn communication skills they'd never been taught, would develop rituals and traditions that honored their unique configuration. Lily would grow up seeing that adults could admit mistakes and change. She would learn that family was defined by commitment rather than biology, that love was a choice you made repeatedly rather than a feeling that happened to you, that second chances existed for people brave enough to be vulnerable. She would internalize lessons about grace and courage and the importance of believing people could be better than their worst moments if someone offered them space to grow. And Daniel and Madeline would wake up each morning in their shared home, would drink coffee together before starting their days, would text each other observations and inside jokes throughout the afternoon, would reunite each evening for dinner with their daughter and the small, beautiful routines of family life. They would travel together, would celebrate holidays, would navigate Lily's childhood and eventually her adolescence with all its complicated emotions and challenges. They would argue sometimes about parenting decisions, about how to spend money, about whose family to visit for holidays, about all the mundane conflicts that arose when people built lives together. But they would argue fairly, would repair when they hurt each other, would remember that being right mattered less than being kind, that winning arguments mattered less than maintaining connection. On difficult days when old pain resurfaced, they would remind each other why they'd chosen this, would look at Lily's artwork covering the refrigerator, would remember the journey from antagonism to partnership, would acknowledge how far they'd traveled from the people they'd been when they first met. They would be grateful for second chances, for children wise enough to believe in redemption, for their own willingness to risk vulnerability even when every instinct screamed to protect themselves through isolation. But that was all in the future, unwritten and uncertain, full of possibility and challenge in equal measure. Tonight, on their wedding night, Daniel and Madeline sat together in their living room and simply existed. Two formerly broken people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment, who'd chosen to build something beautiful from the wreckage of what they'd lost, who'd learned that sometimes the most unlikely families were the ones that mattered most. Upstairs, Lily slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that she was loved unconditionally by two parents who would show up for her every day, who would make mistakes but own them, who would model what it meant to be human and flawed and still worthy of love. On her nightstand sat the drawing she'd made so many months ago, three figures holding hands under a smiling sun, the prophetic vision that had preceded their reality, the child's faith that had catalyzed adult transformation. And in that drawing, in that faith, in the impossible family they'd built from hope and choice and stubborn refusal to accept that loneliness was permanent. In all of that was proof that sometimes broken people could help each other heal, that cruelty could transform into kindness, that love was always worth the risk of pain, and that family could be chosen as beautifully as it could be born. The sun would rise tomorrow on their first day as a married family, on their first steps into the shared future they'd committed to building. But tonight, they simply held each other and felt grateful for second chances, for brave children, for the courage to be vulnerable, for the grace to accept that being imperfect was part of being human, and for the extraordinary gift of finding someone who saw you at your worst and chose to love you into becoming your best. Outside, the autumn night settled over their neighborhood with comfortable darkness. Inside, three people slept peacefully: a father who'd learned to trust again, a mother who'd remembered how to be human, and a daughter who'd never doubted that love could heal anything if you believed in it strongly enough. And that, Daniel thought, in the moment before sleep claimed him, was what family meant. Not perfection, not ease. Just showing up, choosing each other, believing that together you could be better than you ever managed to be alone. That was enough. That was everything. That was home.